The Bullseye Cut, a Gwenpool fanfiction written by Indigo's Abyss and read by Ibis Podfix. Summary. Bullseye worked alone. He was not a personable type. He took orders, killed, and hurt whoever he was told to, then took his money and left. As little human contact as possible. So when reports of an apprentice shadowing him arose, questions were asked. The kid was nothing Bullseye would associate with, normally. Pink and loud and unsubtle, cowed only by the threat of Bullseye's knives. Why was she even there? Because Gwenpool knew secrets. Every secret you could think of. And when someone can stop Spider-Man with only a single whispered word, you want them by your side. No matter how much force is needed to keep them there. Chapter 1. The Apprentice. 2 henchmen ran through the lair, bodies piled up around them. They were close to the exit. Just one more turn to go and they'd be out of here. They'd escape when every other idiot in this shithole had died. They'd be the ones to make it. Marbles clinked on the walls behind them, warning bells of the monsters and to mow them all down. Bullseye, one of them coughed out as they reached the final door. They just have to get fucking Bullseye involved in this. Well, at least we're just lackeys, the other pointed out, finally opening the door to let them out into the cool night. While he's taking out the boss, we can just sneak out scot-free. They shared a laugh of commiseration as they shut the door behind them, sealing the horrors inside. Bullseye was a force to be reckoned with, but he was only one person. He wouldn't notice 2 small fries sneaking out. A gunshot sounded, and immediately they knew something was wrong. Bullseye never used guns. He preferred more unusual ammunition. His preference in ammo didn't matter, as a bullet zinged through the air, followed by another. The henchmen slumped to the ground, dead. They lay there, blood pooling from their heads, bodies slowly cooling, until finally another person walked out of that door. He was an eccentric figure, dressed in a black bodysuit covered in targets, armed with nothing but a handful of marbles and toothpicks. But that was enough. He didn't need anything more. Once he reached the 2 corpses, he put his hand up as a careful warning and knelt to examine the bodies. He rolled them over, watching brains drip onto the soil with a careful eye. It took him 5 minutes to beckon at his invisible ally with his outstretched hand, and then 10 minutes for the said ally to melt out of the shadows to greet him. This one was just as eccentric as her partner. She wore a white and pink bodysuit, with pink shorts barely reaching quarter down her thighs. Her mouth was all white, with pink eyelashes and a little nub at the back where the mouth didn't seem to quite fit. There was a hole in the mouth that revealed fair skin and a mouth set in a grim line. A rifle was hoisted over one shoulder, and a backpack dangled off the other. You took too long, Bullseye criticized. Speed up your response times. Sure, she mumbled, hunching in herself. Your aim is no less shameful, he continued. But at 20 feet with a rifle like that, you could have hit it dead center. Thanks, I've been practicing, she agreed, mouth curling into a smile. So glad you appreciate my efforts. With a flick of his hand, a card grazed past her cheek, leaving a shallow cut. Don't take that tone with me, Gwen, he growled. Or are you so eager to follow in your friend's footsteps? Gwen flinched, blood streaking down her face. Bullseye paid no mind, already heading out. Come on, we must go back to pick up our money. Bullseye wasn't the kind of person who did partnerships. The guy chafed under temporary team assignments, so it was unthinkable that he would seek out that kind of arrangement on purpose. He didn't have the patience, the cooperation skills, the ability to compromise. The idea of him teaming up with someone else was unthinkable. Even more unthinkable was him taking in a greenie. Bullseye had neither the nurturing instinct nor the teaching flair to ever consider something like this. Gwen could tell that Bullseye had never intended to have a protege, so to speak. She was just a convenient person to keep around. One of the little ways that she was reminded of his spontaneous decision to take her in as an unwilling prodigy was the fact that Bullseye's base was really small. A bare-bones apartment with 3 rooms, barely bigger than the one she and Cecil had gotten, and that place had been bought using a D-class merc's income and no paperwork. Surely someone as high-class as Bullseye could afford better. She had found that living here wasn't so bad, if you made sure to keep out of Bullseye's way when they weren't on the job. It would be as silent as possible when they were on the job. Basically, don't try to communicate with the guy. He'll talk to you when he has orders for you, or criticisms. Gwen had made avoiding Bullseye in that tiny flat an Olympic sport. The 3 rooms were pretty much indistinguishable, all scattered with old takeout weapons and stray dollar bills. One of them, however, had a mattress and garment bags containing duplicates of the Bullseye costumes that pretty much constituted the bedroom. And the second was connected to the main door and had a large window and shitty CRT TV set up there. If rival mercs, prospective clients, or vigilantes attacked Bullseye, they tended to come through there. Gwen really couldn't deal with the stress of that, so she didn't use that room often. The third was the furthest from Bullseye, filled with more boxes than the other 2 were. She liked this one best, not only because she had stacked up the boxes and used blankets and pillows to make herself a little pillow fort thing, though that was a big part of it, but also because it was close enough to the router downstairs that she could leech off their Wi-Fi. She was just getting caught up on webtoons she was following, which were thankfully still the same here. Yes, shock and horror. Gwenpool had other interests except for Marvel. Truly a miracle. She wasn't reading comics right now. She was looking into a stained mirror as she tried to bandage the cut on her cheek. It wasn't as shallow as she thought it had been, and if she left it alone for much longer, she thought it would get infected. This wasn't where she had expected her life to go. Of course, she hadn't expected to ever be in the Marvel Universe at all, but once she had crossed over, she still hadn't thought this would be where she ended up. This being stuck in a storage room in Bullseye's apartment. So how did it turn out like this? Gwen didn't like origin stories. She thought they were redundant. If you had a particularly grueling backstory, your entire character might even be revamped to focus on that origin, instead of your main struggles and priorities. It always sucked when that happened. But she had a feeling that she couldn't just open with her sitting in a tent made of faded blankets in the home of evil Hawkeye. People need context. Well, tough. She wasn't going to tell you anything about how she got into the comic world. It ruined all the fun. Don't think about Teddy and his legs sticking out of that wall. What she was willing to divulge was that 2 months ago, she had been doing pretty well for herself. An independent mercenary with her own pet hacker. She'd even hung out with a whole bunch of her favorite characters. Well, not her favorite. She was still waiting to catch a glimpse of Miles and Kamala. She just knew they were going to be the best of buds. Then someone called in a hit bigger than anything she had ever dealt with before. And she didn't hesitate to snatch it up, despite Cecil and Ronnie's warnings. She had met Bullseye there, talked a bit too much, and then... The scent of a human corpse was still vivid in her mind. The closet was empty except for them. Even so, there wasn't enough space for Gwen to be free of the foul stench. Most of the closet was taken up by Cecil's body. Rigor mortis had already set in for him, and his body was stiff. His head was angled towards her, still frozen in that look of desperation and shock. One eye had been taken out by the playing card Bullseye had thrown at him. It had cleaved straight through the eye socket and hit the brain with a neurotoxin. Death had taken 20 minutes, and it had been excruciating. Gwen should look away from his glossy, dead eye, but she couldn't. She hugged her knees to her chest and rocked herself as her best friend continued to rot in the dull slivers of light. His muscles were contracting, twisting his face into a morbid smile. She had killed people, but she never lingered, never thought about it, never had to watch close up as the corpses decayed. She wanted to get out. This was too close, too tight, even the shallowest breaths were making her gag. She pounded weakly on the door, hoping someone would finally open it. They hadn't. Not the first 10 times, or the 100 times, but whoever was outside that door was her only hope. A day might have passed, maybe 3, she didn't know. Gwen didn't sleep the entire time, but her mind had gone hazy, hunger and heat and thirst consuming her. All throughout it, Cecil just kept looking at her. The door was finally thrown open, nearly blinding her with sunlight. Gwen coughed and crawled out, taking deep lungfuls of fresh, cool air. Compared to the outside New York air, the closet had felt like a sauna. "You get a good look," Bullseye drawled, even as she lay flat on her back, gasping. "Because that's what's gonna happen to you if you don't cooperate with the kid." "I'm college age, actually," she coughed out, voice raspy from disuse. "But never actually went, never even finished high school." "Does it matter?" he asked, standing over her. "You have all the secrets to the universe in your head, and I could use that sort of knowledge. So play along, or end up as your buddy Calvin." "Cecil," she corrected reflexively. "He's dead now, and he's not getting a grave. Doesn't matter what his name was." He was right. It didn't matter in the long run, because Cecil was gone, and it was all Gwen's fault. Why was she so pathetic? She should refuse. She should honor Cecil's memory. She should stick to her convictions no matter what, because this new universe was a chance to do something different, to dig her heels in and chase after her dreams, because nothing could hold her back this time. "Fine," she whispered, curling into herself. I can't give you any identities." "I refuse. But anything else, I'll do it. Please just don't put me in there again." Because even in a different universe, Gwenpool would always be a coward. "Glad we could come to an agreement," Bullseye smiled, and that was the last thing she saw until the exhaustion finally buried her. She fell asleep. Now, every day was a nightmare. Even if she was just sitting in Bullseye's apartment, whiling the hours away, the fear and the stress were still there, flashes of Cecil's bloody eye socket hovering in her peripheral. She was never safe. She was never going to be safe here. Chapter 2. The Jersey Witness Killing. A chapter summary. Gwen continues working for Bullseye. Tension rises as their contract takes them to Jersey City, the stomping grounds of one Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. There was a small garden that came with the apartment. God knew what Bullseye intended to do with it, but for now, it was Gwen's territory. A small faded red dot had been painted on the wall of the building, and that was the reason she came out there at all. She clutched a baseball in her fist, took a step back, lined it up with the target, threw it. It landed a smidge to the right and glanced off the wall, leaving not a single mark. Nothing close to the wall-breaking feat of Lester the Child, but it was good progress considering that she had only been doing this for 3 weeks now. What are you doing? Bullseye asked, appearing behind her and nearly making her jump out of her skin. Thought I'd take a page out of your book, she grinned widely. This is how you started, right? Reminding Lester of the info she had on him was her own subtle power play. At least you're taking steps to improve your aim, Lester settled on. Soon we will start you on the darts. For now, eat. We have a contract and I will not have you falling behind. Okay, she nodded, following him inside. There was Nahari and naan on the table that was still steaming hot. Gwen kept a bubble of space between them, even while loading her plate up with naan and Nahari. Bullseye pretended to not notice as he crossed his legs and began eating too. It was hard to be perpetually terrified of someone when you've seen them licking oil off your hands, but somehow Lester managed it. So, you mentioned a mission? She asked, playing with a piece of naan. Bullseye nodded. One of my old FBI contacts has contacted me for a mission. What do you know about Jersey City's Marvel? Oh, what didn't she know about Kamala? But it wasn't a good idea to go blabbing about her idol's secrets, so Gwen kept her mouth shut on that front. Also, FBI contacts. Were they mixing in some of its television backstory for this? She's a child, she supplied instead. A single look from Bullseye told her that that wasn't an acceptable answer. She's known to be stretchy, but you gotta be careful because she can also shrink and grow her whole body, even if she doesn't do it much. She could shapeshift, but she can't anymore because of her super healing or something. Electricity can be used to neutralize her powers, but she isn't bulletproof either. Bullseye nodded, hand on his chin as he took in this info. Did someone call a hit on her? She asked nervously. This didn't happen to younger heroes. No one was enough of a douche to just randomly order a hit on a child. Even if they came into contact with mercs, it was usually tangential, and not them outright targeting the place. For whatever reason, no. Bullseye shook his head. Our target is some witness to a criminal case in New Jersey, and there's a high chance that Miss Marvel will interfere. If she does, I need you to eliminate her. Gwen frowned, trying not to let her doubt bleed onto her face. What's the problem, Poole? He chuckled. Don't tell me you're finally developing a moral compass. Not with red shirts and grunts, I don't, she denied. But it's different with the capes, especially someone as popular as Miss Marvel. No way they'd let Bullseye's apprentice kill her for such a vague reason. I doubt this is even happening in her own book, since you don't fit in with her style. We'll never get away with it. Fallon, if you have any other reason that this would work except for your delusions, say it plainly, Bullseye snapped. Gwen clutched her knees tighter. Look, don't blame me if it doesn't work, is all I'm saying. Considering the fact you will be the one shooting at her, I will blame you, Bullseye glared at her. We need to start treating your psychosis before you start sabotaging my contracts with your inane beliefs. Couldn't you have left enough trace of yourself to be able to go to the hospital? I keep telling you, I didn't wipe myself from the system. I came from another dimension, she corrected. And aren't there any skeevy hospitals you know that'll do it off the books? They deal with gunshot wounds, not whatever you have, he waved dismissively. Now, pack up your arsenal so we can go. Another pause as he took in Gwen's costume. Also, please cover that with something that isn't going to raise alarm bells on the train. Gwen rolled her eyes, but put on a jacket and a pair of cargo pants over the costume. The mask remained firmly in place, however. Keeping the weapons unnoticed was more important than the costume, anyway. At every mission, she had a sniper rifle, a close-range handgun, a bazooka, and at least 20 grenades, complete with 3 clips of extra ammunition for all of them. Except the grenades, duh. All of this she had learned to compress within a single tiny pink backpack, using what was definitely not cartoon physics. No sirree, no cartoon physics here. Just plain skill and efficient space usage. No one would see them coming. Bullseye didn't need all the weaponry she did. Anything he could fit in his pockets would do the trick. Gwen was almost jealous of him. This case could potentially lead to the indictment of John Drenley, Jersey's biggest plasmatic weapons dealer, Lester explained to her, his mask tucked into his pocket and a trench coat covering his suit as they sat in the train. And this witness is the linchpin in their case. Shouldn't they be in witness protection or something? She asked. I mean, isn't it the whole point for them to not be assassinated to prevent them appearing in court? It isn't that dire yet, Bullseye shrugged. I said potentially. If they nail this Hodges distributor now, the police will have grounds to look into where he's getting the weapons, and that'll get Renly in hot water. It's all about the long game that won't happen, because we're nipping the problem in the bud now, and getting a more than reasonable sum for it. Gwen nodded and cracked her neck. So, normal protocol. I stand guard and you wreak havoc inside? Well, you can't do much more than that, he clicked his tongue in disapproval, then added, I want you to deal with the police guard too. Keep them from calling back up. Stay on your guard and don't let any vigilantes get the better of you. Oh, Captain, my Captain, she replied dutifully. At some point, she had to duck into a gas station bathroom to ditch her civvies and readjust her mask so that her hair would stop getting into her mouth and eyes. But after that, she began casing the witness's home. This was the big city, so private homes were very unlikely. But he had a decently pricey penthouse all to himself. Ah, the squabbles of the elite. There were 2 police cars on the street, one directly in front of the building they were targeting, the other further up. They reminded her of the unwanted mantle she had been given by that corrupt cop. The getaway police car. It plunged her straight to another memory. A bank, handcuffs,
How about you hack your way to a terminal met by two old, undamaged, and unimpressed eyes? Don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. Now, how to go about this? She could cause a distraction, but she doubted these guys would hurry to a bodega robbery in progress, no matter how close the bodega was. So, go the simple way and knock them out. You got any knucka gas? She asked Bullseye, before you could start scaling the building. He rolled his eyes, but tossed her canister anyway, and a bottle of chloroform too. This should be fun, seeing how you're pink and white and as stealthy as a parade. Bullseye scoffed. Aren't you the one who still can't find any trace of my existence? Gwen snapped back. Listen, just let the pink ghost ninja handle this. Bullseye pulled out his grappling knife and began to climb, leaving her to deal with the pigs. Killing was easy, as long as she didn't hang around to watch the bodies rot. But it was also loud, and would alert anyone in a 10-mile radius. It was easy to stick the canister into the car closest to the target and watch them drop like flies. The second one required more finesse. Gwen crawled up to the car and peered inside. Only one person inside, but the jacket on the passenger seat hinted at a second, who had gone on a walk or something. Seriously, dude, you had one job. But if it made Gwen's job easier, who was she to judge? She knocked on the door, a loud echoing clang that made the stealth instincts to Bullseye had beaten into her cringe. Whatever, this was freaking Jersey City. If anyone was bothered by a slamming car door, she'd eat her giant custom boot. The sound alerted the cop just fine, though. He stood inside the car. Gwen readied her rag of chloroform and scraped the tip of a dart along the door, trying to provoke, but not to the point where he freaked out and holed up inside the car. It worked. The door opened. The man came out, brandishing his gun in front of him. Too bad for him, Gwen straightened up behind him and forced the gun away from him with her left hand, while her right covered his mouth and nose with the chloroform-sodden rag. He struggled wildly, the anesthetic not immediately knocking him out. He was a buff guy. No way Gwen could keep him subdued long enough for the chloroform to take effect. She snapped his neck and got it over with. Effortless, silent, easy. And the chloroform wasn't even needed. When the other cop came walking back around the corner, she jumped up from the corner and slit his throat. Screw the sedatives. She would have recorded her success to Bullseye, but the man didn't have a comm. Yet another reason why he wasn't fit for cooperating. All that was left for Gwen was to secure the penthouse, and then make sure no one attempted to interfere. The only reasonable exit was the elevator, which was dumb, because what if there was a fire, or an earthquake? You really need to think these things through. And she snuck inside and cut the cable to make sure no residents accidentally wandered into the crime scene. After that, there was nothing to do but wait. How long could it possibly take for Bullseye to kill one fucking person? A lot of time, apparently. Enough time for a flash of blue, red, and lightning bolts splayed across the chest to show up. Gwen got no warning. This giant fist that came out of nowhere. She dodged it clumsily, trying not to squeal. A real, true-to-life embiggened fist! And she had almost got to touch it. This was the best day of her life. Hey, Miss Marvel, she grinned, looking around. What are you doing here? I stopped the police before they could radio it in. I keep a close eye on local politics, Kamala told her, a large arm darting back to her body as she emerged from the shadows. A fittingly dramatic entrance for the legendary cinnamon roll herself. Of course you do. You're incredible, Gwen beamed at her. Kamala did a double take. Thank you? She shook her head. No, forget that. Did you kill the two police officers? Oh boy. Probably best to not admit to that outright if she wanted to stay on good terms. ACAB, right? She said instead. I once saw a cop take all the money some crooks grabbed from a bank robbery and then pocket all of it. Easily thousands of dollars. They're all trash. I don't agree with the cops all the time, Kamala agreed with a grimace. But that's not an excuse to murder them, you criminal! Even after what they did to Amir for simply walking down the street with a pressure cooker, Gwen challenged. Kamala froze. Gwen realized her slip up too late. I don't know any Amir, Kamala tried to deny faintly, the lie obvious in her ashy face. Why would I? What do you know? As fear morphed into rage, and Kamala started throwing fists, Gwen tried to do damage control. I won't tell anyone, I swear, she promised, dodging a punch. Your secret is safe with me, but I need you to get out of here. Why should I do that when I can get you arrested now? Because then he'll see you, Gwen warned. Who's he? Kamala frowned. This wasn't good. Bullseye was probably wrapping up by now. Shrink down, stay hidden, and pray he doesn't find you, Gwen hissed at her. Kamala looked like she was about to argue, but then one of the penthouse windows snapped open, and Bullseye started making his way down. Fortunately, Kamala decided to listen to her and shrank to a minuscule size. Bullseye landed on the ground beside her and looked around serenely. Gwen was sure she could get away with her misdemeanor. Hey, Poindexter, she grinned at him, saluting. Follow your orders to a T. You use chloroform on those two in the street corner? He asked, crouching down to get a better view. Those necks looked too jacked to be drugs. Yeah, no, broke their necks instead. Bullseye clicked his tongue. Sloppy. Probably left evidence all over their bodies. Don't see how that's your problem, Gwen replied, fidgeting with her hands. It was easier to lie to him when he wasn't looking at her. She might even get away with it. Maybe she had been too confident with her lying abilities. She wasn't expecting it when he turned around and threw a sharp rock at her knee with unerring accuracy. It immediately buckled, fiery hot pain erupting from her joint as she crashed on the ground, and an agonized scream pulled at her throat, but she kept her mouth shut. No loud sounds, or else the civilians in the area might be alerted. "What the fuck was that for?" she hissed instead. He pinned her down with a glare. "Don't lie to me. I know Miss Marvel was here, and you let her go unharmed." "Not by choice," she tried to protest. "I told you that I couldn't hit her. She's just that good." "Maybe I should put you back in with Cecil if you're not good enough to work beside me," Bullseye snapped back, his voice deadly serious. Gwen hadn't thought he would still have Cecil's corpse in that closet. The idea of it made her feel sick. "Fine, I swear," she promised desperately. "Next time I won't hesitate. Just please don't." She could feel his derision, but he shrugged anyways. "One last chance then, Paul. Now, we need to get moving." Every time he shifted her leg, it felt like hot metal filings were deep inside her flesh, chewing a way out. It hurt to move, it hurt to walk, it hurt with an intensity that made it difficult to think. But she dragged herself onwards without a protest. She was just glad that Kamala had walked out of that alive.
Chapter 3. Where'd the plot armor go? See, most comic books would have a character walk off a leg injury, easy peasy. But she's not in a comic book, was she? Gwen had thought it would be alright. She was the main character, wasn't she? She could get a mangled knee and walk it off easily the next issue. But she was pretty sure it was the next issue now, and the pain still ebbed through her leg like a hot iron, becoming more and more intense every time she thought of a way to describe it. 2 weeks after her fateful run-in with Kamala Khan, and Gwen's knee still felt like it was on fire if she leaned on it too much. It was ugly, too. Despite the bandages and salve some merc medic had given her, the whole thing was swollen and violent, veins sticking out like vines in the mess. At some angles, the skin was raised at a sharp angle, and she could almost humor herself into thinking it was edges of bone fragments, waiting to burst out. The longer she stared at it, the more vivid it became, the more painful the hurt got, yet she couldn't rip her eyes away from it, like it was consuming her, demanding her attention. Go on an assassin mission, kill 2 policemen, engage a fictitious but still incredibly powerful superhero in a fight, and the only injury she got came from her benevolent mentor. Didn't that just figure? On the plus side, Bullseye didn't seem too interested in pushing her after her leg went down. Maybe he understood the limits of the human body after all. Not that the comics understood the limits of the human body. Oh, they insist that some character had perfectly human durability and have them walk off injuries way worse than Gwen's. The only reason she'd even been willing to go superheroing without pants had been because she was certain that she would never get stabbed or scratched up. Too gory. Back in the real world, her father had once said that pain hurts less when you weren't focused on it. Whenever she had a tooth knocked loose, or a stomachache, or a wrist sprain, they would get out a puzzle or a game, and they would try to keep her mind off of it. Those were only meant to work for little things, not whatever had happened to her leg, but it was at least worth a shot, wasn't it? "Hey, Lester," she spoke up, one day while the guy was helping himself to breakfast. "You got anything to do?" There was silence for a few seconds before something rustled and footsteps warned her of his approach. A pack of small marbles were thrust into her face. They shone with a metallic gleam, tinged with a layer of fine red powder. "Metal shot for your practice," he explained. It was harder to read his face without the mask on. Gwen had simply gotten used to reading expressions when they were painted on distinctly patterned masks. Of course, when asked for distraction, the guy only had more training to offer. But it was better than nothing, and Gwen took him up on the offer. Her aim with the baseball had been getting better after all, which was why she was moving on to smaller projectiles. They were slippery in her hand, even without the powder. Metal shot was hard to hold, even trickier to throw. They were made for slingshots after all. But she lighted up carefully against her eyes, angled her wrist just right, and flicked it. The metal sphere bounced off the wall, leaving a smudge directly on the target dot Gwen had painted. Bullseye. The joke didn't feel as funny as it would have been before. Her accuracy had improved drastically since being brought under Bullseye's tutelage, which was total bullshit, because he didn't even teach her or anything. She was doing all the work herself. Maybe it was simply being next to him, or the fact that Bullseye had a recognizable brand, and if she was supposed to be a sidekick, then the writers of whichever comic she was in must need her to fall in line with that brand, which implied that she wasn't the main character here, but instead a side character in a Bullseye comic, of all things. That was horrifying. She refused to let that be a possibility. But accuracy or no, she still lacked power, stamina, ability to hit objects that might be moving even the slightest. She gritted her teeth and hurled another shot at the wall. A slight crack stretched across the target. Finally, another advancement in her training goals. She noted, dimly, that once she had gotten her attention off of it, the pain in her leg had not just lessened, but completely vanished. As soon as she had that thought and caught a glimpse of that bruised and battered joint, the pain came flooding back. Never mind then. That must have simply been a trick of the old nervous system. She wasn't making enough progress, not soon enough for Lester Poindexter standards. "You're still limping," he noted.
Has the doctor I found you not been good enough? She handled as much of the damage as she could, Gwen replied, injured legs stretched out on a cardboard box. But it's never going to be the same again, even with time. You should have thought about that before you maimed your star protege. Bullseye clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction. We can't keep waiting around for you to be in top condition. I've already done a few contracts on my own, but you need all the experience you can get. Some workarounds must be put into place. You got any ideas? She asked, trying not to come off too rude. No need to provoke the guy after he'd already left her with permanent injury. Lester tilted his head consideringly. The place you got that hideous gear made, he suggested. Go there and ask for a knee brace, and pants, and decent under armor, and more functional holsters. All in all, just ask for a proper fucking outfit. Gwen rankled a bit at the criticism. Sure, the suit wasn't exactly what she had in mind when she'd gone to Big Ronnie's place, but it was her suit. She picked the colors and chose to have a mouthful and kept the katana holsters at the back, even though she didn't know the first thing about swords. It was all her. So what if she was lacking in a few key areas? Besides, you're making it sound like it's my shit taste that's responsible for this, she crossed her arms. But it wasn't. I couldn't afford the good stuff when I started out. Lester cracked a smile, a cruel, cold thing. You think that's still a problem? You're in the big leagues now, kid. He threw a stack of bills at her, which Gwen caught easily, and began flipping through. It was a shit ton of money, easily more than she had ever held, even after the alien massacre spit out. What's this? She asked, instead of simply accepting the money. She knew better than that. Your cut of the assignments we've done, Lester explained. I suggest you use it to treat yourself to equipment that will stop you from dying. Wait, I'm being paid for this? Yes, why wouldn't you? Because you locked me in the closet with my dead best friend? Just go, Lester waved her out of the apartment. Finding Big Ronnie's store was a pain. Just a few months ago, Gwen had been making the trip to the costume maker's place of business every day, so the direction she had to take was basically ingrained into her head at that point. Except, the directions weren't the same. The trip wasn't starting from Cecil's apartment like always. Instead, Bullseye's apartment was across the city, and the route was totally different. But with the help of the privacy-breaching GPS in her phone, she found herself in front of the store once more, looking at the fold-out signboard with sketchy reviews on it from heroes who had probably never even heard of Ronnie. She took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the door handle. This was the simple part. Get in, get her new equipment, get out. Pay in the process. She could handle it just fine. What was so hard about talking to a red shirt? Before she could gather up her nerves, the door was already swinging open, pushed out by a leaving customer, a satisfied one, judging by the bag tucked under his arm. Gwen would have overlooked him for just any other vigilante hopeful if it wasn't for the red lenses in his gold-rimmed glasses. That made her freeze in her tracks. The guy also seemed to freeze a little. Ah, shit. She'd been spotted. Or sensed, at the very least. Matt Murdock didn't do much spotting, so to speak. Don't get her wrong, Daredevil was cool and all. The hot lawyer of the people shtick and super edgy world on fire thing always got to her, but they weren't exactly on good terms. In fact, knowing how to use his weaknesses had been what had drawn Bullseye to her in the first place. This was really all his fault, if you wanted to get technical about it. But he was in civilian form right now, and so was she. They couldn't start duking it out right now. Well, she could. She had no identity to maintain, but she did so not want to go viral as a teenager who fought a blind guy. They were stuck in an awkward standoff now. Someone was going to have to break the ice first, and given how she was 70% sure she was the main character, it might as well be her. Hey, could you please move? She asked, trying to play the innocent bystander. I can't enter the shop. Oh, of course. Matt shook his head and quickly shuffled out of the way. Guess he was following her lead and staying out of her way. No way he was going to let this go, though. She was betting he was hovering around the corner, listening to everything that happened inside. Probably thought she was going to threaten the costumer or something. Well, joke's on you, Murdoch, but Ronnie was a friend. The costume store hadn't changed a bit, down to the scattered dossiers of costume plans and the coffee rings on the desk. Hey, Ronnie, Gwen sauntered up to the desk. Been a while, hasn't it? The woman stared at her, eyes bugged out in disbelief, as if she was staring at a ghost. Gwen, she gaped. You haven't been seen for months. Ronnie thought that you were dead. Well, I'm not, Gwen replied, discomfort stirring in her gut. She wasn't the dead one. Why was everyone concerned about her? They should be mourning Cecil. And I need a costume upgrade, with pants this time, and maybe armor. Her leg twitched in pain. Any way you can incorporate a leg brace in there, too? Gwen stared at her, eyebrows scrunched up. What happened to you, Gwen? She asked. Nothing, Gwen replied, slapping a large portion of the money she had been given. Will this be enough? Ronnie shuffled through the stack with trembling hands, still looking surprised. Where did you get the money? She asked. Have you been getting violent jobs from somewhere else? Doesn't matter, Gwen rolled her eyes. Can this pay for a high-quality suit? The way Ronnie's eyes shifted made it obvious that it wasn't enough. Not surprising, since lightweight protective fabrics could go up into the millions. Even Spider-Man had just decided to fuck it and take his chances with the bullets. But instead of rejection, Ronnie smiled wistfully at her. I'll scrounge up some resources, see what I can do. Would you mind having an Under Armour suit that doesn't match with your outer one? Sure, whatever. I don't care if it looks good even. Gwen sighed, slumping onto the counter. She should be relaxed and loose. Careless even. But the tension still wound through her muscles. She couldn't let her guard down, not even around Ronnie. You don't care? Ronnie choked out, barely tamping down her outrage. Fine, okay, this is fine. Ronnie has been stockpiling fabric in that unpopular shade of pink you like so much. It is thicker though, less flexible in some places. Will that be alright? I'm not trying to be the next Spider-Man, she shrugged. As long as I can run, it'll be enough. Ronnie smiled, sad and soft. And I suppose your running has improved from last time? Nope, she chirped, giving a shit-eating grin. Ronnie laughed. Alright, let's take your measurements, and I'll get started. She ushered Gwen to the back of the store, measuring tape in hand. She kept training, kept stretching her knee and working on recovering, kept oiling her guns and sharpening her knife, kept sparring with Lester, even down on one knee, kept standing in the yard throwing things at that faded target. All the while, the crack grew and grew. 2 weeks later, and using nearly 3/4 of the cut she had gotten from Bullseye, Gwen's new costume was prepared. Are you ready for this? Ronnie asked, handing her a garbage bag. Yeah, hit me with it, Gwen agreed, tapping her feet excitedly. New costume, new her. New her working for petty antagonist Bullseye. She suited up almost mechanically, not quite registering the zippers and clasps and holsters until the full costume was in place. Only then did she step out of the changing room and strike a pose in front of the full-length mirror. Hubba, hubba, she whistled, turning a little and flexing her arms to admire the suit. Now this is wicked cool. The most obvious change was the shoes. They were chunkier, with shock absorbers in the heels and knives on the sides, hidden suction cups in the soles too, and contained in knee-high pastel pink and white boots with acid yellow highlights. For the most part, the top looked pretty similar to the original. Same pastel pink sides with a thick stripe of white going down her middle. Gone was the onesie design, though, replaced with pink long shorts that stopped the handspan before her knees. Personally, she thought they were too long to be considered shorts like she had told Ronnie she wanted, but it was short enough that when she kicked up, the fabric would ride up, revealing black padding that glinted in the light with metal fibers. The same padding was in her boots and torso too, filling out her form and protecting her from blows and stabbings. It made her look buffer, more obviously a threat, and while Gwen had liked the way her previous costume had made her look like the soft, huggable semi-adult she was, maybe this was for the best. Maybe people didn't know she was a breakable twig who could barely lift all the guns she carried around. It was a weakness she couldn't afford to have anymore. On her left leg, yellow cable stretched over her knee in an intricate pattern. It was tight, but instead of cutting off her blood supply or something, it numbed out the pain, stopping the leg from moving in a way that would make the pain worse. Because that was how braces worked. Do you like the color? Ronnie asked, hovering over her. Medical braces aren't common. Only yellow-themed heroes ask for them anymore. Give your boots some yellow so that it doesn't stick out as much. You think there's a correlation between vigilantes who like yellow and getting sprained legs? She joked, making experimental grabs at the holster on her back to test how easy it would be to grab a sword from there. She didn't have a sword, or how to use it, but she bet that the holster would come in handy if she ever decided to get one. At least, movement was easy, with how bulky and heavy all the protective padding was, and how stiff the rest of the fabric. She hadn't expected to be able to move her joints this much. Ronnie used her older, more stretchy fabric for the joints, Ronnie explained, grinning smugly. Didn't believe you when you said you didn't care. Then why did you bother asking for my opinion? Gwen rolled her eyes. Still, though, thanks. Wait, hold on a sec. She tilted her head from side to side, straining to hear a discrepancy. What? Ronnie asked, looking more alert. Something wrong with your ears? No, Gwen frowned. My hearing's great. I can hear just fine. While wearing this mask. Oh, Ronnie relaxed. Those are the spatial awareness speakers I put in the mask. Because I know you don't have any super hearing to make up for covering your ears with thick fabric. Gwen rotated her head, testing out all the background sounds, echoing in her head, completely unmuffled. This is useful, she nodded approvingly. Thanks, Ronnie. Always happy to help a violent mask in need, Ronnie smiled at her. Now, while we're here, you want to tell Ronnie where you've been? Discomfort curled in her gut, and she looked away. Well, I've thrown my lot in with Bullseye now. Ronnie gasped, pen clattering to the ground. Yeah, it doesn't feel good, Gwen agreed, wishing the ground would just swallow her up. Then why are you working with him? Ronnie asked, her eyes sharp and analytical. I know everything about everyone here, Gwen explained, and Bullseye isn't going to just let me walk away with that knowledge. Not after what happened with Daredevil. The gears were visibly whirring in her head as she posed her next question. Gwen, where's Cecil? I think you know. Gwen. 6 feet under the ground. If he was even given a burial, if not, he's in a closet, still rotting. Ronnie looked slightly green. Gwen felt like she was about to throw up too. You need to get out of there, Gwen, Ronnie told her. I can't. I don't have a civilian identity to fall back on, or any money. I can't even leave the Merc business, Gwen pointed out. He's going to find me, and it's not even a matter of if, just when. Ronnie deflated a little. Okay, I see your point. Just stay safe, keep me updated. I'm lucky that I got to meet you this once. Don't expect it again anytime soon, Gwen sighed. Ronnie's eyes softened. There was pity in her eye that chafed on Gwen. Anyways, I should go, she decided, pulling her sweatpants and hoodie up over the suit. Thanks for this. I've already paid full in advance, right? Yes, Ronnie agreed automatically before frowning. Hold on. Ronnie has a gift for you. Gwen watched her reach behind the desk and pull out an egg. Excuse me? She blinked as the egg was forced into her hand. I mean, I'm honored, but what? Break it when you need help. It'll help you, but only once, Ronnie explained. Use it wisely, get help. It was a commendable effort, even if it wouldn't work. Gwen knew it wouldn't work. There was no way an egg would make it all fall apart. But she tucked it into one of her numerous pockets anyway, and smiled at Ronnie gratefully. Thanks. I better be going now. Ronnie, I need you to confirm once again, Matt repeated, trying not to grip the counter too tightly. The girl, she's being blackmailed? By Bullseye, yes, Ronnie agreed, a huff of air following her statement, giving away her exasperation. Shit, he swore, running a hand through his hair, trying to distract himself with the feeling of greasy strands. He really needed to take a shower soon. He couldn't help it, with the case he was working on at his day job, and his regular patrol business, not to mention the Pink Slayer situation. Pink Slayer. When someone had a name like that, you weren't expecting them to last long. Except this girl was different. The longer he investigated it, the more questions were raised. She had no background, no identity, not even a birth certificate. This was the kind of identity erasure that only the best hackers were capable of. Except 6 months ago, she had completely stopped hiding her identity. Didn't doctor any of the police reports which mentioned her, let herself get caught on camera all the time. According to Peter, who had called in to look at camera footage, something had happened to her to make her drop the act, and that wasn't even mentioning the fact that she knew the weaknesses of everyone around her. No, not just weaknesses. The girl's breathing was quick. Panicked. The way she moved made her seem uncertain and inexperienced as blows were exchanged between him and Bullseye. He almost brushed her off completely, only remembered her general position to make sure he didn't accidentally bump into her until it happened. Matt Murdoch, a whisper, too quiet for anyone other than him to have heard. Maybe even the girl wasn't aware that she had spoken out loud, but it had still been spoken into existence. He had heard it. The girl knew his secret identity. He didn't know how or why. He had never even encountered her before in any form until they ran into each other at Ronnie's place. But she had known who he was. What else did she know? What else would she be willing to tell Bullseye? Maybe she's a friend of your Team Red buddy, Ronnie offered. Have you asked? Team Red isn't a thing, he told her sternly before continuing. And Spider-Man is working on the case already. I was talking about the Merc. What would Wade have to do with this? A sigh of heavy disappointment, hard enough to brush against his face. Because her name is Gwenpool? I'm sorry, her name is what? That made so much more sense than the Pink Slayer thing that had been going around in gossip circles. Also, he was going to kill Wade if this was a deranged cousin situation. Gwen blinked as she continued walking along the sidewalk. That was weird. She had been walking here, she knew it, but also she hadn't been? It all felt fuzzy, like she had just spawned here or something, even though she hadn't been. She had walked here, after leaving Ronnie's battle spandex. And where was here? Cecil's apartment. She crawled up the fire escape and walked in through the busted window. How had the landlord not dealt with this already? There was a smell coming from the closet, a smell that confirmed everything she needed to know. All right, she breathed, taking the egg out of her pocket. Here goes nothing. The soft, fragile shell gave way under calloused fingers, and instead of slimy yolk, fumes gushed out, letting her hand tighten around a card? 1825, it read, with no other explanation. Chapter 4. The Tabling of Turns. Gwen continues her tutelage under Bullseye, now with a different spin on meetings she had in canon. Dead bodies were scattered over the floor, slumped over countertops and workspaces, as if they had dropped dead in the middle of work, without even a warning, because they didn't get one. Gwen had wiped them all out in one fell swoop. There were only 7 targets, so it wasn't hard to take them all out at the same time. What made her exceptionally proud were the traces she left. That is, there were none. Completely spotless, except for a single bullet wound, right in the head, for each one. She'd been double-wielding guns with silencers. They never saw her coming. She stepped out into the main part of the room, walking past the bodies and the brain matter, to instead make a beeline for the filing cabinet in the corner. Technically speaking, she could have gotten the info she needed without killing anyone, but that would have been way more of a hassle. Best to kill them all before someone pulled an alarm. That was one justification. The other was simply that she enjoyed it. The trigger on her finger and a splatter of blood. It was as cathartic as cussing kids out in COD. And there weren't even any consequences. These people had never even existed before she entered the room to kill them. They were basically created to be murdered. Wasn't that great? She could just keep going and pretend that every bullet she was firing was actually going into Lester's smug bastard face. Okay, she needed to chill. Work herself up too much, and she wouldn't be able to be normal around the guy after this. File obtained. A full list of the Cardinal Ring's mid-level dealers in her hands. 20 grand in her pocket. She tucked it into her penguin backpack, along with her guns, and walked back to the window she had gotten in from. Something crackled in the periphery of her awareness. Gwen swung around, staring at the groom crouched behind a trashed vending machine. He had a handgun clutched close to his chest, and stared up at Gwen in fear. The gun angled down, his fingers stretched over the trigger, her knife arced through the air, burying itself into his neck. She didn't give him the chance to shoot, and quickly moved to pull out the knife and wipe the gore off the blade before stuffing it back into its sheath. At least her aim was getting better. One quick sweep to make sure she hadn't left behind any witnesses, and she pulled herself out of the window. Her upper body strength had been getting better these days. Went for lugging around an arsenal everywhere. Bullseye was waiting outside, tossing rocks from a roof. Dead pigeons scattered around him like fallen leaves. He turned around to look at her, head tilting back to take in all of her. Especially the flecks of blood on her boots, from where she had walked through the freshly culled drug runners. Wordlessly, he snatched the file from her hand and began looking through it. Good, he decided, putting the file down. A heavy hand came down on her head to ruffle her mask. You did well. Gwen wanted to snap his wrist. He was her only anchor to the main comics canon. She couldn't risk cutting ties with him. How else was she expected to make cameos in more popular series? So, she simply tucked her hands into her pockets, gave him a bright smile, and backed away subtly. A finger brushed against a sharp piece of glossy card. She pulled it out curiously. Ah, yeah, the card from the egg, 1825. What does that mean?
She had looked into it, but there weren't coordinates or Bible verses, or Quran or Torah, or any other easily Googleable holy text for the matter. And still, no cash. Just a random card spawned by an egg. Regular stuff. When they returned back to Lester's base, Gwen sequestered herself in her haven, while Bullseye wrote up reports and decompressed. It was always better to stay out of his way during this time, and his temper was shorter than ever. She reached for her phone on autopilot, flicking through the apps to click on. It was always a surprise whenever she made to reach for the unlimited app, and it wasn't there on her phone, replaced instead by a glitched-out icon that crashed her phone as she tried to click on it. Sometimes she almost forgot, until her fingers were just millimeters away from it, and she just narrowly avoided pressing it. She could sneak through the window and go into the garden to practice throwing more metal shots, but Lester had gone mad at her for wrecking his wall after she managed to knock a hole in it after hours of arduous tosses. You'd think the guy would have at least commended her on mastering his own trademark, but no, all she got was a backhanded bowl of plaster. Asshole. And she fixed that wall so good, you can even tell something had happened there. So Gwenpool 1, Bullseye 0. She had a routine, Gwen had learned, over months of careful observation. He liked to change it up sometimes to make her freak out, but she had an outline of what patterns he followed and was comfortable with after a mission. The client would be getting a visit soon, if her calculations were correct, and the remaining cash would be paid up. Then he would return and try to get the drop on her, just to lecture her about being aware of her surroundings. And when her fear no longer entertained him, he would move on to berating every minute action she took in the mission, all to remind her of how useless she really was, how stupid and weak and pathetic she was that fucking Bullseye, of all people, was considered her superior. The lock on the front door clanked shut. He was gone, and he would be back in an hour or more. Even with Bullseye gone, she didn't feel better. His presence haunted her through the entire building. She was never going to be free of him. She stared at her phone, the clock on the lock screen brightly informing her about it being 10:15. When she'd get up and eat something. Who knows if Bullseye would try to restrict food as his newest little torment. She should shower too. Her muscles were stiff and painful, and the new suit was the opposite of breathable. In between two all-important needs, nourishment went out, and she headed towards the grimy excuse of a kitchenette. She'd never seen the guy use it, but she couldn't tell if it was because he couldn't, or if he wasn't willing to let his little protege, unwilling apprentice, mildly disgruntled kidnappee, they hadn't exactly decided what her deal was yet. Maybe he was just hoping she'd get Stockholm into spilling the names and identities of all the superheroes in the world for him. Theme in such a domestic state, but unused kitchenette or not, there was still a pack of instant ramen in one of his cupboards. She hummed along to a theme song that may or may not exist in this universe as she boiled up some water on the hot plate and reached for a knife to cut open the plastic container. Except when her hand meant nothing where she swore she had left it, she turned around to look, only to be met with a tall, bearded, strangely familiar guy wearing a badass floaty coke. Only to be met with a tall, bearded, strangely familiar guy wearing a badass floaty cloak who was standing way too close to her. Whoa! She startled, backing away. Who are you? How'd you get in? Oh my fucking god, you're Stephen Strange! Obviously, you magicked yourself in.
Why are you here? The Sorcerer Supreme listened to her airheaded rambling with mild amusement. You're my appointment on 6/25, right? He clarified. You used the coupon I gave Ronnie for Christmas? Oh, that's what that thing was. Hello, Gwen? It was a time. Her time with Bullseye might actually be making her dumber. Yes, she managed to say, once she stopped screaming internally. Well then, Gwen, what can I do for you? He asked, eyes twinkling with curiosity. Now that I really proved that she was in the comics world, no one's eyes in her world ever twinkled. Or if they did, it wasn't obvious enough for her to read it. I'm not from this world, I'm sure you've noticed, she finally managed, gesturing to herself. She had no solid way to prove this, but she was convinced that her not belonging must be obvious to those in the mystic arts. Sticking out like a brand, just as it had back in her world. Yes, your voice does have an odd quality to it that seems to transcend this dimension, Strange agreed, hands on his chin. I've never seen anything like it. What was so in your head, Gwen? I've never seen anything like you. Take it as a compliment, Gwen. He meant it as a compliment. It seems to me that there's a strange energy binding you to a 4th level dimension. I can't access those, and they don't mesh well with our world either, Strange hummed, his hands glowing with mystical energy. I'm assuming this displacement is causing you a great level of distress? If this keeps up, you'll probably be sucked back out soon enough. But I suppose that I can find a way to send you back sooner if I... No! She yelped. No, I love being here. Don't send me back. She'd finally gotten a glimpse of what she could have. A sandbox made especially for her, brought to life by a million creatives. Back home, it was already hard enough. Now that she knew what she could have, she didn't think she could survive without it. Strange expression softened. Okay then, he agreed. What do you want then? Is there any way you can cement me here? She asked, tripping over her words. Like, the other universe is trying to drag me back, right? And this universe is trying to push me out, limiting my options. I don't exist here, and it reminds me at every turn. I can make you an anchor, yes. Strange waved his hands up. It's a simple charm, of course. I take your few innate traits and implant them into the fabric of reality, and the rest of the world will sort itself out. What are your innate traits exactly? Well, Gwen tried to say, and then fell silent. When she'd come into the comic book world, she had completely reinvented herself in the hopes of standing out in the comics. And that was who she was. This was who she always wanted to be, because who would judge a pantsless screaming hooligan when there was a walking, talking duck detective? But maybe it was best to start with the basics. My name is Gwenpool, with an E. I've killed more than a bunch of red shirts, and I am my very own person. And I want to be a superhero. Oh, put that down as your aspiration, Strange muttered, casting a look at one of Bullseye's discarded masks on top of the television. That stung a little, even though it was obviously the truth. Finally, whatever incarnation he was breathing faded away, and he reached forward to poke her on the forehead. Energy sparked through her. It was almost like reality bent around her for a few seconds, and then the bending ceased, and everything settled down around her once more. Well then, Gwenpool, Strange smiled, offering her a handshake. Welcome to your new Earth. She took the handshake eagerly. Does this mean that I have a social security number? She squealed. This was huge. It could change everything. She might even be able to ditch Lester in his stupid base. Strange looked disconcertedly guilty and not happy. Listen, kid, he breached the topic guiltily. I simply gave you an anchor in this universe. So that thinks you're from a universe that isn't a 4th level dimension. That doesn't mean you existed here before you showed up. I can't fool countless databases and people into thinking you lived a life here. It wasn't fair. Hot, angry tears were brimming up in her eyes. This was meant to be an easy fix. Why wasn't it fixing? You're supposed to be the Sorcerer Supreme, she snapped. If you can't help me fake an identity, who is? Listen, kid. I'm sorry that I can't help you out, Strange shook his head regretfully. But this level of intricate memory magic isn't something I'd risk for the people dearest to me. How about now that you're not in danger of being zapped away at any second, you can look into some other solution? Yeah, okay, Gwen agreed, backing away from him. Wait, hold on. Could you do me another favor? Strange smiled a little indulgently. Of course, Miss Poole. What is it? I have a friend, she explained, badly. Or, well, I had a friend, Cecil. Cecil, I never actually learned his last name. Wow, I'm awful. He's dead now, anyway. My current boss killed him. That's the favor I need to call in. Do you think you could... Consider it done, he agreed. It'll take some time to sort through every dead teenage Cecil, but I can tell you where he died if that helps. Sure, that'll narrow things down, he agreed. You just stay here and keep your head down for a few days, and I'll recover your friend for you, as best as I can. Thanks. Again, she threw out. Just once more. Strange winked at her, and then vanished into mist. Once the uninvited wizard had left, Gwen finished her ramen and rushed through a shower, making sure that she didn't use too much hot water. This was a turning point in her story. Finally, the possibility of breaking free of the miserable life she was stuck in. Bullseye was the anchor in her story. Her connection to the important people and events. Cutting him off was risky. It meant letting go of the possibility of tie-ins and cameos in other comics. Would she be able to make it on her own? Or would she be killed off in the background of some comic Bullseye featured in to make a statement about his cold and unfeeling nature, even extending to his own students? Was she meant to be the lamer, dumber, filler apprentice, meant to contrast the actual apprentice Bullseye would pick up later? Her ego couldn't take a hit like that. No, the narrative had gotten her to this point. This was no reason to fuck it all up, even more by struggling against it. Strange had fixed her little issue with the real world trying to pull her back out, but that didn't mean the narrative couldn't still try to wipe her out anyways. Strange was right. She needed to sit still and keep her head down. By the time Bullseye came back, she was sitting in the storage room, the Gwenpool costume drying by the window, so she had put on a pair of jorts and a sweatshirt as she aimed a hairdryer at her soaking hair. "You," he grunted, barging in without a knock. She'd left the door open a crack, but still. "Hey," she waved, running a comb through her hair, as another jet of hot air blasted over her. "Is something wrong?" "We've got another job," he explained over the roar of the hairdryer. "A guard job this time." Oh, how the tables had turned. Hopefully she wasn't going to be the one killed by a vindictive little monster apprentice. "When do we start?" she asked, setting the hairdryer aside to comb her hair into place finally. "Tomorrow. Some aliens need us to keep their weapons dealing safe," Bullseye explained. There was a slight quirk in his mouth that immediately raised Gwen's suspicions. "We're totally stealing a couple of those weapons, aren't we?" she clarified. "You're stealing a couple of those weapons. I will have nothing to do with this. And if you get caught, I'll be forced to put you down. So don't get caught." She didn't doubt it for a second. The floating base in the middle of the ocean was damp, dreary, and incredibly tense. Gwen held herself straight and stiff and weaved nervously around the crowds and crowds of squid-headed aliens. They didn't seem particularly unwelcoming. In fact, they seemed to think that she was an adorable curiosity, judging by the way they patted her head and cooed. At least it was better than being the people they strapped into chairs and disintegrated for demonstrations to future buyers. She'd take the patronizing head pats any day of the year. Another good thing about now having pants is that she could now sneak one of the handheld vaporizers into her shorts without it being obscenely obvious about what she was doing. It didn't help her with her anxiety when she could feel the cold metal rubbing against her leg every time she moved. But no one around her seemed to notice. Bullseye was clearly recognized as the guy in charge. He was the one who accompanied the dealers to weapons exchanges, and the one who followed the big shots around. Gwen only dawdled in the sidelines, keeping an eye on the perimeter and weapons cache. She didn't exactly see what the point of it all was, since the aliens had some pretty solid security themselves. Those seemed almost redundant compared to the scouts and jet skis. A perimeter alarm blared, and the handheld monitor she had been given blared to life. Something had breached after all. Well, fuck her for not thinking this through. She didn't think, just grabbed a couple of laser daggers off the armory wall and ran towards the area where the breach had happened. What lay in front of her was a bloodbath. Squid heads were scattered across the floor, bluish-green blood smeared all over the floor. Their solid, bulky armor had been cleaved right into two, exposing extraterrestrial innards. The guns lay discarded, inches away from their handheld tentacles. They never even got to use them, nor did the killer think to grab the weapons. So, he wasn't here for them. It wasn't her business to care about his motives. It was her job to spot the target and pull the trigger. And bad news for the perp, but he was standing 15 feet away from her, hacking away at another horde of squid aliens. Gwen had to stop herself from scoffing at the ease of which the assassin was destroying the other guards. That's vapor blasters. How were they letting him get close? This just proved the fact that it was the right idea to have an eyesore costume and mask, or else she'd be turned into one of these guys just by the rules of the universe. Ah shit, the guy was getting away, and killing more of the people she was meant to be protecting. Gwen needed to get on that. A hero like Spider-Man would crack a few quips. Maybe try to find common ground with the guy, at least introduce himself before apprehending him. That was what she always expected of a hero. She wasn't a hero, though. She didn't even give the man a warning before she picked out one of the laser blades, lined up with the assassin, who was now fiddling with some sort of computer in the wall. The knife went flying from her hand, twirling blade over handle, while the man continued working on the wiring of the computer. He had taken his helmet off to see the screen better. All the better for the knife to embed himself into the back of his head with a dull thunk. He fell onto his side. Probably never even got a warning before the light left his eyes. Gwen started to creep closer. Not because she wanted to see the corpse up close, but because she had the strong feeling that if she left behind even one laser dazzler, it might push Lester over the edge. That was when the screen caught her attention. There was writing on it that she couldn't understand, the same squiggly alphabet that all the alien languages had in the comics. What she did understand was the warning exclamation point with the blinking symbols. The image of the literal explosion on the side was also helpful. It was a timed self-destruct, and she needed to get out of the range immediately. Gwen made a break for the exit to the ocean. There was no blaring sound, but it still felt like she could hear sirens in her head. She had barely heaved the solid steel door open when the explosion rocked the base, sending a wave of hot air and pressure that threw her into the tumultuous waters. She was submerged in rushing heavy water that pressed down on her from all sides, tumbling her around like a sock in a washing machine. Her lungs were being pressed down like water balloons, and she couldn't tell which way was up and down. For a period of time, she almost thought she actually was going to die. Then her head broke through the water, letting air rush into her lungs. The waves spatter out onto the sharp rocky beach, leaving her curled up, weaving, and puking up water. She just washed that costume too. Wrung out like a used towel, she simply opted to lay there and let the sand and salt dry on her skin until the sun had begun rising. At that point, she finally pulled herself up and peeled the spandex off to replace it with the civvies she had in her bag. She found herself stumbling back into society, waterlogged, bruised, and feeling like her brain cogs were gummed up completely. She was only half aware of the slushy she ended up buying to soothe her overheated brain. Could near drowning cause brain damage? Because she felt like she had brain damage. Hopefully only temporary, comic, convenient brain damage. Lester would be mad at her if she took too long getting back. She needed to make sure he didn't think that she had made a run for it. She might do that later, but not now. It might make him tighten her leash. Another sip of the blue drink. The world rocked underneath her body, thinning her black spots through her vision. Oh, she was on a train. When'd she get on the train? She squinted past the spots in her vision until finally it cleared so that she could get a good look at her fellow passengers in the next station where the train was going to stop. Speaking of passengers, she looked blearily at the boy sitting across from her, who awkwardly avoided her gaze. If she didn't know better, she'd consider him to be the spitting image of... There was a keychain swinging from the zipper of his school bag with his name on it. Holy shit, this couldn't be happening. It was Miles Morales.
Chapter 5. Miles to go. Miles rubbed his eyes tiredly. Last night was awful. He'd barely gotten 2 hours of sleep in, and even that was restless. He wasn't looking forward to going to school already sleep-deprived, but he supposed that was something he was going to have to get used to if he was meant to be Spider-Man. He was hoping at least school would be a normal amount of stressful and dramatic, nothing more, nothing less. He'd been feeling very optimistic about it, too, when he got onto the train. One station later, several passengers came in. It was a few minutes later when a spider sense buzzed under his skin. Just a slight warning, nothing major, but enough to grab his attention. He should keep an eye out. A woman stumbled into the seat across from him, and his eyes were drawn to her automatically. She was limping obviously, holding her right knee at an awkward angle. The shorts she was wearing only served to highlight the engorged plum color her knee was turning into. It wasn't her only injury. Bruises went up and down her knees, and a black eye harsh enough to make every person around her edge away. He wasn't going to assume anything about her, but seeing that she was sitting across from him, he couldn't help but take in more and more of her. She had a thin sheen of sand and salt over her skin and in her hair, but her clothes didn't have a speck on them, so she must have changed at some point. She had a slushie in her hand that she slurped from intermittently, as if it contained the gift of life. She looked a little hungover, the way she clutched her head. Her face alone could place her at anywhere between 16 to 22, so he wasn't sure if it was legal, but with the injuries and the weird way she was acting, it didn't paint a pretty picture either way. She had turned to look at him, and his spider sense spiked up again. Was someone targeting her? Should he offer her some support? The girl's eyes widened, and his dangerous sense kicked up another notch. She was now leaning over to him. He was going to be dragged into something harrowing, but he steeled his nerves anyway. He was a random kid in his train, and this random girl had picked him out for no reason whatsoever, and he had to put aside his paranoia to listen to whatever she had to say. You get the feeling that we're experiencing the same thing twice? She whispered into his ear. What? He blinked. He was expecting a lot of things, but this definitely wasn't it. Yeah, she nodded, not a hint of mirth in her eyes. Like, this already happened. Then there was a shift or something to recontextualize the whole scene, and it's happening again. Which is weird, because comics don't really do that. It's more of a written novel thing. That's a terrifying thought. Huh? What? The girl giggled suddenly. Sorry, my head's all over the place. Just knocked me out for a second there. I may have a concussion. Yes, clearly. He should point her towards the hospital and hope she had insurance. What I meant to say, she continued, still whispering, and he was pretty sure that was too quiet for any normal person to listen to, but she was looking right at him, so she meant for him to hear. And he was overthinking this. Stop being paranoid, Miles. This random girl doesn't know your secret identity. God, he needs some sleep. Is that I'm a big fan of you. He blinked, trying to unwind that sentence. Was he famous as Miles? He made waves at the science fair for sure, but he got the feeling that this wasn't what she was talking about. You know, the girl shrugged, trying to curb the jittery excitement coursing through her. Then she angled her eyes down to the seat, where her left hand was hanging. She twisted it, bringing her middle and ring fingers into her palm in the twippy spider gesture. Miles's blood froze. How had this woman found out his identity? This was dangerous. She could ruin his entire life. She could sell him out, send villains to his house, destroy his school. Catastrophic visions played in his head, making him dizzy. Shit. He wasn't thinking properly when the train ground to a halt. It didn't matter to him that it might not be his station when he marched off, hand clenched around the girl's wrist. She didn't squeeze tight enough to forcibly drag her, but she followed along quietly. You okay? She asked, a little confused. You look a little freaked out. A little freaked out?
he asked, trying to force down the hysteria. How do you know my identity? He whispered, looking around to see if anyone was listening in. Great job. I think no one noticed. The still unnamed girl gave him a thumbs up. The worst part about this was how nonchalant she was about the fact that she had the power to ruin his life. Could you please take this more seriously? She shrugged, playing with a strand of pink hair. Sorry. It's just my thoughts feel a little fuzzy. As if there's a wall set up in my brain where I can't properly arrange my thoughts and get them out. I can't explain it. It keeps haunting me. Yes, because you have a concussion, Miles remembered. Wait, how did you get a concussion? Her gaze dropped down, letting the excited and ditzy fan persona drop to reveal the quiet, slightly tired girl she'd seen in the train before she recognized him. It's a long story, she explained. There's aliens and dimensions and Bullseye, and it's a lot for me. His initial panic was dying down. Okay, she was clearly dealing with shit of her own. She shouldn't have immediately jumped to thinking she would ruin his entire life just because she had figured out his identity. Sure, she could very well still do that, but there was no reason to think that she would. I've dealt with dimensions before, he offered. I could help you out. She laughed. Yeah, I'm aware. Spider-Verse is half of your shtick. Innocent girl who didn't ask for this, he reminded himself stubbornly. Don't freak out over little things like her knowing way more about spiders than was normal. She's already in a bad place. Don't make it worse. It's unfair that I know both your names and you don't know mine, the girl decided, flashing him a soft smile. So let's start over. Hey there, I'm Gwenpool. Did I mention I'm a fan? Hey Gwen, he nodded, cracking a smile. Gwens are bad news for Spider-Man. It's Pool, not Stacy, Gwen corrected, sticking her tongue out. I'd consider myself the cooler one, but you can't undo Ghost Spider. She's iconic. So she knew an unnerving amount about people who were not him. Good to know. Terrifying, but at least this wasn't a targeted attack against him. He was going to ask her more about how she got here, maybe what led to her injuries, or if she would be okay with going to the hospital, but the girl kept rambling on. Dude, this is the first good thing that's happened to me in months, she announced, leading the way as they walked. I've been fucking up nonstop ever since Cecil was killed, and after that horrific interaction with Marvel, I just lost all hope that I'd ever meet a hero who actually likes me. Oh, that was heartbreaking. Also, an uncomfortable amount of backstory he couldn't quite unravel. Was she talking about Miss Marvel? They'd met. He should look into that. Also, where the fuck were they going? He voiced that question in a more polite tone. Dear Skull, Gwen shrugged. That's why we got off at your station, right? He hadn't even noticed they were walking along the route he took to school. When had that happened? His eyes strayed to the time on his phone, which was horrifically late. I'm gonna miss first period, he groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. Oh, sorry, Gwen shrunk into herself. I didn't mean to mess with your education or anything. I was just so excited to see you. It's fine, he felt the need to immediately comfort her. Don't worry about it. What about you? What about me? She asked, tilting her head as if it was an absurd question. I mean, do you want to get your injuries checked out? Miles asked, eyes drifting back to look at her utterly wretched knee. Can you go to the hospital? I totally understand if you can for whatever reason, but I'm sure I'll be able to find a nurse or paramedic or someone to help you. You said you were in an explosion? Got roped into helping squid alien weapons dealers, she agreed. That lot of good it did me, huh? Ugh. Lester's going to be so mad at me for running off like this. Ask me something else to distract me. Who's Lester? The question came automatically to mind. Schmuck glared at him. Dude, you're supposed to be distracting me. He's probably going to kill me if he thinks I'm testing his limits, and I'm really trying to forget about my impending doom. It was announced flippantly, as if she didn't mind the whole world knowing, but something told Miles that she was 100% serious about this. But since you asked, Lester's kind of like my boss. He snatched me up a while back and made me his informant and lackey all in one. Oh, and he's Bullseye. That certainly changed things. She worked for a villain, a guy he'd fought against more than a couple of times. But she also seemed like it was completely unwilling, so he was going to assume that she was a victim like any other. Bullseye hadn't come to his home yet to kill him, so at least she was keeping his identity under wraps. Sirens were buzzing in his ears, not the spider sense. Actual sirens were buzzing in his ears. His school was on fire. Miles swore, reaching for his mask and making sure he had slipped on the suit that morning under his clothes. He ducked behind a bush to pull off his civvies and tugged the mask into place. There was a rustling sound behind him, and he turned to check on it while shoving his clothes into his backpack. Gwen was on the ground a couple of feet away, changing out of plain clothes and into her own suit in broad daylight. He coughed for a second and looked away sharply. Please don't get in my way, he told her before rushing into the burning building. Being Spider-Man had a lot more firefighting than he had first thought, but over time he learned the basic process. Get in, get everyone out, web up load-bearing pillars to make sure the entire structure didn't collapse, Even if he was closer to this particular building and its occupants, that didn't change. He couldn't let himself get worried about Genki's safety or start contemplating how the fire even started because he had a job to do. He had to be Spider-Man right now. A blur of pink was in his periphery, a stark contrast to the violent reds and oranges. Gwenpool. He doubted her abilities before because she looked and acted inexperienced. But she was handling herself like a pro in here, crouched down to avoid the smoke and holding a... Where did she get an axe? Should he be concerned? Nabbed it off one of the fire trucks a while back, she answered, as if she could tell what he was thinking. How'd you know I was going to ask that? He managed out, grabbing a semi-conscious student who was lying crumpled over their desk and escorting them towards the exit. I'd be pretty concerned with the proto-villain got their lethal weapons, she replied dryly. You don't seem like much of a villain to me, he offered, as comforting as he could be. Something splintered and broke from further inside the building. Gwen barreled through the door and rushed towards the noise, Miles following behind her. Smoke was thicker here, and the heat more oppressive. It seemed to be closer to where the fire had broken out in the first place. Miles checked the air filter and the mask one more time and then dove into the fray. Flames were licking up the walls, and it was hard to see exactly where he was going, but his hearing was able to guide him through to the people who needed help. There were only a few people still in, but they were all in serious condition. He slowly helped them up, carrying them over his shoulders as much as he could. One girl, Maria, his mind applied frantically. She sat next to him in chem, lent him a pen one time, and invited him to a pineapple-only party another time. Wheezed for air, and he patted her on the back as best she could. He stumbled towards the exit, getting them to safety the only thing on his mind. Spider-Sense lanced through his brain. It was his only warning, before seconds later, a giant piece of flaming wood was falling from the ceiling. There wasn't enough time to run, to dodge, to do anything. All he could do was bear the brunt of the force himself and hope. A fire axe came flipping through the air, easily cleaving the wood in half, sending fire and splinters raining down around them. Miles whipped his head around to look at the person who threw it. Gwenpool grinned uncertainly at him. He spared her a quick nod before rushing the last victims to safety. The next few minutes, or hours, he wasn't entirely sure, were filled with confusion. There were people he needed to make sure got medical attention. Damage control needed to be done. It was a bombing, according to police, and the perpetrator needed to be caught if the school could be considered safe again. In all the confusion and activity, he barely had a thought to spare about Gwenpool, until he had retreated behind one of the many abandoned buses to catch some air and pretend that he was just some random hero with no prior connection to the school. Hey man, she tapped him on the shoulder, somehow having followed him up. He hid the urge to flinch. How could she be sneaking up on him already? Even Miss Marvel didn't get a pass by his fire sense until 3 months at least. Gwen didn't seem to notice either way, with this same shit-eating grin on her face. How cool was that? She gushed. Can you believe we're really having a team-up? Do you think it would be cooler if I was guest starring in your comic, or if you're in mine? Oh, even better. They give us a whole mini-series of our team-up a la Spider-Man/Deadpool. Great. She devolved into crazy talk. This is what he needed right now. She'd been serious and professional before, but it seemed that mask was slipping. Or was this zany version of her another mask, to hide the hurt sincerity he'd seen before? It didn't matter, he decided. It didn't matter that she was suddenly talking about comic books and tie-ins, or that she'd worked for some really, really shitty people, or that all it would take was one bad day to ruin the lives of a lot of people he cared about. She was a good person, and incredibly smart, and he needed to listen to her. Well, what are we waiting for? Gwen asked, casually pulling out a handgun. Holy fuck, checking the chamber. Let's go, partner. Go where? He asked, feeling completely left out of the loop. To the Bomber's house. You know his house, right? Why would I know where the Bomber lives? I don't even know who they are. Sure you do. It's that guy you ran into the ceramics lab a while back, remember? She reminded him. That was weird. He'd almost forgotten about that, but now that she mentioned it, it all came flooding back. Right. He's Damien. We take English Lit together, he agreed. Had a group project once, so I went over to his house, but he didn't seem to like me very much. Not a fun experience. There we go. Gwen patted him on the back. Now, we pop over there, put a couple lead ones in his noggin, and go back to our lives. What the fuck? He put up with a lot of odd stuff from her, but this was hitting a limit. We're not doing that, he told her stiffly. She cocked her head. Why not? As if asking why murder was wrong was something normal people did. He's just going to do it again, you know. Cut the problem at the source, I always say. Oh, she was one of those people. Not just a proto-villain, a true villain. He probably shouldn't immediately jump to judgment. Wolverine killed people all the time, and he was one of the best heroes out there. Captain Marvel had no qualms about killing either, and she was Captain Marvel. Killing didn't automatically make someone a villain, but all of them would think twice before suggesting murdering a child. No matter what that child had done. Gwen hadn't even flinched. No, this was wrong, all wrong. She was almost psychopathic in her mannerisms, too eager to murder, and for what? A chance to hang out with Miles Morales? What else would she be willing to do? I don't kill, he decided. And if you're supposed to do this, you can't kill either. Lame, Gwen booed. The writers are just using that as an excuse to keep Damien's bombing around for more storylines. You've got to fight that morality, man. Fight the editorial. There's no editorial, he told her, trying to keep his frustration at bay. There's no comic book. There's no writer. It's just me, and I'm not a killer. Maybe you need to consider what you want, and not whatever fantasy writer wants. Gwen stared at him, and for a second he almost thought that he had gotten through to her, and then her shoulders shook. Fists clenched in frustration. You think I don't know about what I want every damn day, she snapped, voice low but brimming over with anger and bitterness. I live in the apartment of a sociopath and don't even have a fucking bed. I just sit there and every part of me hurts and all I can do is throw baseballs at a damn wall and think about how this wasn't what I wanted. He pushed too far. She was almost screaming now as she faced around, waving her hands in the air. I know a lot of shit about everyone here. I know you, I know your parents, I know the kind of fanfiction you write. I have been along for the ride for every fucking super tragedy that has happened in this world, and don't even get me started on the battle world. I probably know more about your backstory than you do. I could tell you more about Wolverine or Blade or any other hero out there, and I would love to hang out with them and have adventures, but I don't think you've noticed, but everyone hates me. He'd forgotten to ask her how she knew all this stuff. Probably should have made that a bigger priority. Listen, Gwen, People are staring, he managed out, looking around him. Do you think I care? She snapped. I've always been watched. What does it matter some random set dressed in red shirts are staring? My whole life is just that now. Just a comic putting me through a paper shredder. I might be more real than the rest of you characters, but I'm probably not much more real anymore either. We're not in a comic book. That's just what you think. Look around you. Think about it for just a little while. Nothing that happens here makes sense if it wasn't a comic book. You're crazy, he whispered, backing away from her. People had gathered all around them, whispering and filming. It seemed that Gwen had only just noticed too, as she moved back, retreating into herself. Yeah, I guess I am, she muttered under her breath, soft enough that only her super hearing could pick up on it. Then she turned round and walked away, the crowd parting to let her through. Sure, Matt had been really pissed off at her by the end there, but he's so bad for her. She deserved better. He hoped that that wasn't the last he saw of her. Or, if they did meet, he hoped at least they would be on better terms. Gwen dragged herself through Manhattan and back to Lester's apartment. Before she could touch the knocker, though, she froze. That whole Spider-Man interaction was extremely weird. Hey, she could think more clearly now. Why had that stopped exactly? She probably wasn't going to find out anytime soon, was she? And she found that she was fine with that now. How odd. Turns out screaming existential truths at your hero is very therapeutic. Therapy over and done with, it was now time to face the music. She squared her shoulders, ignored the twinge in every sore muscle in her back, and knocked on the door with every drop of confidence she had left. For several minutes, no one answered. Then the door creaked open to reveal Lester, wearing pajamas and half a pizza slice hanging out of his mouth. Who's this? He mumbled. Gwen, your apprentice, remember? She asked, cracking a weak smile. Please don't throw me out. I swear I tried my level best to get back on time. What are you talking about, kid? He grumbled, opening the door further to let her scurry inside. Didn't particularly expect you to be fine after the explosion I built. Wait, you made that bomb? Did she even have the spoons to be shocked? Yes, as a distraction in case someone didn't attack the base. Then you or the other guy must have set it off. It doesn't matter, we've got the guns anyways. True to his words, there were futuristic alien guns and blasters stacked up in the corner of the living room. Gwen was itching to get her hands on one, even with the betrayal fresh on her mind. You're such an asshole, you know, she burst out, and then froze, waiting for the outburst. Screaming, the pain. Bullseye snorted. What was the first time she had ever heard him laugh? You're funny sometimes, kid, he complimented, going back to his pizza. She felt her shoulders slump, only to tense again as his icy cold voice continued. That was a joke, right? Of course, she agreed, grinning as brightly as she could. You're the best, boss. No assholes here, he nodded, the veneer of cruelty easing. But for how long? It didn't matter, Gwen decided, reaching for a slice of pizza herself. She could live like this. If this was meant to be her storyline, then she could live like this. She'd been living in the same phase for months now, when it would have been done and over with in a few days if it was a small thing. They must have decided that she was better off here, and she will just have to be okay with that. There was a playing card sitting in her things, with Doctor Strange's insignia plastered on the back. She put it in her least used weapons pouch and tried to forget about it. Gwen might be okay with living this, but she could never subject Cecil to it. Chapter 6. Spotlight. Someone had recorded the interaction between Spider-Man and an alleged villain arguing with each other behind a school bus, several feet away from a literal disaster. And they posted it too. Obviously, it went viral that same day. Went up to 1 million views in a week. Miles was going to die from the humiliation. He'd been meaning to go over to Miss Marvel's stomping grounds and ask her about Pink Slayer, so the second he managed to catch her standing on a random roof, he jumped at the chance. Then he saw the phone in her hand, playing a video. A very familiar video. He really was going to die from the humiliation now. Marvel, he spoke up, appearing behind her. She didn't even have the decency to startle, instead turning around and giving him a wave. Hey, Spidey. You didn't by any chance happen to see this video, did you? She asked. Unfortunately, he ground out. The girl mentioned you while you were working together, so I was thinking you would know more about her. Not really, Marvel shrugged. We fought once, she killed a couple cops to cover for Bullseye while he murdered a high-profile witness, and here she hesitated a bit. She called my brother out by name. Miles froze. That wasn't good. Marvel was incredibly protective of her identity. He didn't even know her first name or any of her hobbies. She talked a lot about her fanfics, but if you were to ask what her username was or what the specifics were, she'd climb up tighter than the heavy-duty safes their villains were constantly trying to break into. The only reason he even knew she had a brother at all was because she wanted to brag about her baby nephew. Or, to be specific, she'd one day came into their joint patrols waving about their Batija, and he'd whipped out Google Translate and made a couple assumptions. So he didn't really know that there was a brother at all? And this random girl had. And just by watching this video, I'm getting more context as to how she got that info, Marvel explained. For example, why didn't you tell me that you wrote fanfiction? Oh god, he was going to throw up. What if she found it? What if she was disgusted? What if their entire friendship was ruined by the ridiculous things he'd done when he was young and hormonal and stupid? Were you embarrassed? She pressed. It's not something to be embarrassed about. Marvel, can we drop it? He asked, feeling a headache throbbing behind his eyes. Was it smut? Because everyone writes smut, especially in the teens. Marvel, if I knew your real name, I'd be full naming you right now, he told her. Let's just focus on the Gwen issue, please. Fine, Marvel agreed. Wait, her name's Gwen? Yeah, she spilled everything to me. I think she was a fan. Seriously? That was the same shit she told me when we fought. I thought she was delusional or something. Didn't realize there was actual merit to it. I think she's dealing with issues too, Miles agreed, looking back on their whirlwind encounter. And she's having trouble with figuring out what's real and what isn't. But the environment she's in right now isn't healthy, and it's making everything worse. If she got the chance, I think she truly could be a good person. Marvel hummed. So, we should try and get her out of said environment, right? She checked. Do you think you should tell the other Spider-Man about this? Why? Miles frowned. What does he have to do with any of this? Because he knows Deadpool, Miles, Miss Marvel reminded him. And for all he says about not being kid-appropriate, which he isn't, not by a long shot, he's got a pretty hard line against hurting child or child-adjacent people. And Gwen looks like she's a few weeks away from being a minor. And she pays homage to him in her costume and name? No way is he going to let that slide. So what you're saying is, Miles hummed, the cogs turning in his mind, we should stick Deadpool onto Bullseye. Exactly. And are we going to address the fact that means that guy is guaranteed to die a horrible death? No, because I want to sleep at night. Fair enough, he supposed. This entire situation was a clusterfuck and a half. I can't believe you let the video go viral. Bullseye ran for the 20th time, pacing in front of her. Gwen kept her back straight, fighting the urge to cower or fidget or show any other signs of perceivable weakness. A temporary setback, she attempted to tide him over, will never happen again. I know better now. Cecil could have wiped it without breaking a sweat, the traitorous thought came to her mind. It was stupid to want him here with her, she reminded herself. Why would she want her best friend to be exposed to the fear and horror and tension that made up her entire life from now on? What kind of fucked up person would ever ask for that? I thought that you could be trusted, he continued. Again, this was something which had been hysterically repeated multiple times since he had seen their video trending. And I can, Gwen insisted. This was days ago. I'll never do that now. Days is not enough time to build an ironclad instinct, Bullseye roared out. You said all that shit to me about how you were never going to spill anything and how all the secrets were safe, except now it turns out that you're just willing to run your mouth to anyone and everyone except your beloved mentor. At this point, he reached up and grabbed a hand around Gwen's neck. She froze up as her feet were lifted straight off the floor, and she was left hanging there by a single hand he had clutched around her airway. She tried to hold it for as long as she could, but eventually she started to choke and strike out at him fruitlessly with her legs. Please, she gasped. Finally, the grip relaxed, and she collapsed onto the floor. On instinct, she scrambled to the corner with the wall surrounding her on two sides, protecting her. The phantom weight of the fingers still burnt a brand into her throat. I'll be keeping a much tighter leash on you from now on, Bullseye told her. And here I thought we were finally building a rapport. Then he stomped outside, the door slamming behind him. From there, Gwen was thrown headfirst into a much more rigorous schedule. They did several jobs a day, and much more diverse jobs than normal, too. Territory control, debt collecting, culling rivals, even just regular old hits that they weren't meant to question. It was easy enough. It all led back to killing, killing, and killing. She didn't hover around to keep an eye on the corpses if she could help it. Otherwise, the smell of Cecil's cooling rot would layer itself thick over her tongue. But this was what she had signed up for, she reminded herself, gritted her teeth and buckled down. Weeks passed, and she became better, even better than she had been before Miles Morales had happened. Once, when she was feeling particularly brave, she had gone onto one of the freelance violence forums that Ronnie frequented to find jobs for her clients. Pink Slayer was mentioned there several times as Bullseye's companion. People were praising her, giving her high reviews. Efficient, charming, young, they dutifully reported, good at subterfuge, suited for evading police, more potential than Bullseye for more varied jobs. That last one made her puff up with pride. Fucking hell, Lester, she could do things that he couldn't, that weren't directly linked to her origin. Has an interesting personality. That immediately brought her down to earth. An interesting personality. That was one way to say it, wasn't it? When you started screaming in front of a superhero and let yourself get videotaped talking about how the things you knew were turning your mind inside out, that hinted more towards severe mental illness, not an interesting personality. Would this quirk of hers affect her standing in the Hitman world? No, otherwise Deadpool would have never made it. As if sensing her thoughts, the next comment read out, a Deadpool type. Hey, she just ran that comparison. No way so many people thought she was like him. Right? Well, anyway, she didn't know what they meant by her being a Deadpool type, so she kept on reading. Turns out the Deadpool types were the ones who fraternized with superheroes without expecting any payment from them. These types were unreliable and untrustworthy, and probably going to turn on you on a dime because of stupid things like moral codes and power of friendship. Deadpool, specifically, managed to sidestep this issue by being the deadliest man on Earth. Gwenpool didn't get that courtesy. She had to be better than that. Slowly, Lester seemed to relax again. She was more forthcoming with information to him, and more ruthless against her victims. He seemed to forget the incident entirely, allowed her to pick up missions by herself that she executed efficiently and professionally. Gwen learned to build up a network with the people she worked with, learned to recognize the mob bosses and the weapons dealers and the drug runners that sought her services the most, memorized their rivals and goals and their stances for each other, until she was well-versed enough to play them off each other without a second thought. It wasn't just about understanding the playing field. She also needed to have the arsenal to run down any opponents. As she did more jobs, she got more money. Every single paycheck was immediately reinvested into building up that arsenal. Gwen got bigger guns, better holsters, collapsible knives that could be concealed easily and then expand into the size of a katana, the small ones of wakizashi, like that, but think more box cutter. She loved it. It scared the shit out of people when she whipped it out. The effect would be so much cooler if she wasn't wearing all this blocky padding, so she looked even smaller and less likely to be holding any weapons whatsoever, but they couldn't have everything they wanted in life now, could they? So Lester was letting her do solo runs now, like, all the time. It was on one such run that led her back into subways. She hadn't gone back since the Miles debacle. How she managed to avoid the biggest public transport system in the city without a vehicle was a miracle, but she had managed it. And then one day she was walking past the subway station, and people came pouring out, screaming in horror. Gwen's muscles immediately locked, thrown into the fight or flight instinct. There didn't seem to be anyone she'd worked with before behind the chaos. In fact, there didn't seem to be a single villain attacking the vulnerable crowd. "What's going on?" she asked, snagging the shoulder of a passing man.
"Snakes!"
he screamed, nigh hysterical.
"There's snakes in the subway!"
Sheesh, that was less ominous than the movie she'd watched. Didn't quite add the tension of being suspended in a metal box several thousand feet in the air. This wasn't a time to be giving needless criticism. There were snakes in the subway, and only Gwen was there to save the day. Even though, technically speaking, she wasn't meant to be playing hero. Not anymore. She'd learned to accept her lot in life and give up on stupid wish fulfillment daydreams. But there wasn't anyone there. No Spider-Man, no Iron Man, not even Nova. This was New York City, but even then, no heroes came. It was only her. Gwen sprinted down the stairway, barely planning anything out. There were snakes, but how hard could it be? She just had to shoot them, and they'd scatter if they knew what was good for them. Except when she got into the station and looked around. She found no snakes. The whole place was deserted. "What the fuck?" she whispered, backing away. Something had lured her here. Something malicious. So, she really does have a heroic side, a woman hissed into her ear. A woman's voice, comparatively young, but somehow dry as bone, conjuring the image of a withered skeleton. Gwen whirled around, gun at the ready. There was a tall woman looming above her, face covered with a mask with one giant eye taking up the entirety of her upper face. Her mouth and lower face were exposed, revealing ashy blue skin. "Who are you?" she asked, holding the rifle up to aim directly at the strange woman's chest. "I am the Terrible Eye," she announced, voice rippling with hidden power. "And we have been hired to end your life." Ah, shit. The hitman had become the hitmaned. But who even hated Gwen enough to send a demon assassin after her? Sure, she was going up in the world, but she was still relatively small fry. If they had a problem with anyone, it should be with Bullseye. Why would the protege character be the one directly targeted in the first place? It should be the protagonist front and center every time. Hey, maybe she really was the main character after all. Then another bit about that ominous speech struck her. Wait, you said we, didn't you? She asked hesitantly. There was footsteps suddenly coming from her left, and before she could even turn around to face the newcomer, a pair of black boots entered her direct vision, delivering a kick to her solar plexus that sent her veering directly into the wall. This one isn't particularly bright, is she? The owner of the boots asked in a thick French accent, landing lightly on the ground. No, hold the phone. This wasn't any black boot-wearing, awesome kick-having, almost offensive Frenchman. This was Batroc the Leaper. Gwen's gaze shifted to the other girl. Batroc was a very recognizable villain. He wouldn't show up for any stock grunt operation. This girl must be working for someone who's made quite the name for themselves in the comic book world. But who, though? Looks like she hasn't had quite enough yet, Batroc cackled, readying himself for another kick. The girl held up her hands, silhouetted by ancient magic. No, Batroc. Allow me. She summoned a bolt of energy to smite Gwen where she stood, but luckily Gwen managed to get a hold of her senses and move out of the way. They'd gotten the advantage this time, but no way was she going to let them keep it. She whipped out her most trustworthy guns and immediately began firing shots at the two. Several hit, but only in non-vital spots, like she had intended. She didn't want to kill them, just cause enough pain and damage to stop them from being able to attack her. Her aim is better than anticipated, Terrible Eye coughed out, bullet wound going straight through her hand. Who are you working with? Gwen finally got the chance to ask, lifting the gun threateningly towards her. Instead of the girl, however, it was Batroc who spoke up. MODOK, he hissed, barely managing to get through the pain of the bullet, very much wedged into his humorous brain. The mechanized organism designed only for killing? Gwen asked in disbelief. That MODOK put out a hit on me. What did I ever do to him? Then she started laughing hysterically as the full meaning of that hit her brain. That weird head guy tried to kill me and failed? That's incredible. And sad for him too. That's just so sad. More incredulous laughter followed, slowly making her victims more and more insulted as they continued to hemorrhage blood onto the filthy subway station floor. Hold on. I gotta tell Lester all about this, she wheezed, hopping up into the false ceiling above to get some privacy as she opened her phone and dialed Bullseye's number. It rang 4 times, and she almost thought it had gone to voicemail until he picked up. Did you fulfill the contract, kid? He asked, tiredness lining every syllable. Yeah, she agreed. This is actually about what happened after. The situation I just dealt with? You're not gonna believe it. She was almost vibrating with excitement. Well, I can't believe it until you tell me what's up. He admired her impatiently, so spill. Okay, listen to this, she managed out between chortles. MODOK sent killers after me. Instead of the hysterical laughter or even the amused puff of air, she was instead greeted by grim silence. Team MODOK, huh? He wondered. I've heard a lot about them. Very effective bunch. Whoa, hit the brakes. What? These guys had a rep, and they were a full team. A nagging detail immediately jumped out to her. A team, not a duo. There were more than 2 of them. She jumped down hurriedly into the train station, but it was too late. There was a big bearded guy in a pristine lab coat standing up there, giving Batroc and Terrible Eye brightly colored chemicals. They both looked much better than they had when she shot them, and Batroc was even already standing on his feet. Fuck, they had a healer. She hadn't thought about that. Lucky shot, Terrible Eye growled at her. Already aware of Gwen's presence, her 2 teammates turned around and immediately got into battle stances as well. Next time, you will not be so lucky, Batroc added. Gwen gulped and took a step back. No good. Already they were shooting forwards, intent on grabbing her. She bolted out of the subway station. The 3 members of Team MODOK followed closely after. Chapter 7. MODOK's Unexpected Savior. Gwen dodged another kick from Batroc. The wall he hit instead crumpled like paper. He was stronger than she had thought from the comics. Guess Captain America can make even the strongest men look weak in comparison. She tried to make another run for it, but she was blocked off by a bolt of magic from Terrible Eye, who had been perfectly restored. She was hurting Gwen, keeping her in Batroc's crosshairs and setting him up for the kill, while the medic provided support from behind. Out of nowhere, it seemed, the thought came to her that they were the perfect adventuring party. And who was the weakest link in every adventuring party? The healer. Gwen vaulted over Terrible Eye's head, her guns drawn. Behind her, Terrible Eye gave a shrill shriek, and Batroc screamed. But she didn't hear him properly with all the blood pumping to her ears. All her focus was on the bearded man in the lab coat, and the gun she had pressed to his temple. Normally, she would have taken off the safety first thing, but she kept it on this time so that she could click it off menacingly. the look of fear that flashed through his face when he felt the vibration of the movement through his head. "I didn't want to do this," she whispered, turning around to look at the others. "But you all forced my hand." Lies, lies, lies. She didn't give a single fuck about this man who was ready to kill her for a paycheck. They asked for this to happen. But pretending that she was desperate would put them on edge. Nothing was more dangerous than a cornered animal. She learned that from Lester when he had underestimated the son of one of his targets, and the boy had hurled an axe at his head. "Take care of how you proceed, kid," Batroc warned her, reaching forward. Gwen held the gun at the healer's temple steady, keeping the finger threateningly light over the trigger. At the same time, her other hand aimed another pistol directly at Batroc and fired a shot at his feet. The recoil from that one reverberated into her hostage, who quivered even harder. Terrible Eye had her eyes clutched over her mouth. She must not have been in the business for long. Gwen could exploit that. The problem was Batroc. He seemed to think that Gwen was bluffing and took a sharp step forward. She wasn't bluffing. He'd learned his lesson for ever thinking that Gwen would bluff. She made sure to make direct eye contact with the man as her finger began to tighten around the trigger so that she could see the moment he learned his lesson. She had learned that lesson from Lester, too. Eye contact makes the violence so much more personal. That was when the feeling of wrongness began to swamp through her body. First, a soft, subtle feeling, but it grew quickly until it was a klaxon siren, so loud and shrill and clear that she could almost hear the words of the problem. Wait. She could hear the words. And against her will, her wrist flicked to the side. The bullet embedded itself in the wall right behind Megatoni. Gwen froze, looking at her traitorous hand. What was that? Team Modoc was similarly frozen, staring at the scene with bated breath, even as smoke continued to rise from the barrel of the gun. Had they seen it? The way the entire world flashed pink and weird? Did it make even a difference? In that instant, the weirdest, most snapshot memories had flickered through her. Cut up memories that didn't make any sense, emotions that she shouldn't be feeling right now. And yet, when she looked at their pathetic little squad, all she could feel was an intense feeling of protectedness. It must be a spell that the Terrible Eye had managed to plant on her. Who knows when, but at that point, Gwen didn't care. She couldn't kill Team Modoc. It gave her a weakness they will be all too willing to exploit. Best to play it as a bluff. Pretend that that was what she was going to do the whole time. "I'm sparing you this once," she sniffed, holstering her guns to put her hands on her hips. "I'll leave you alone, and you guys dip. Get a paycheck somewhere else." "No idea about the other two, but editorial knows you're better than this at Batroc. How about I refer you to one of my brokers? It's freelance work, but at least it's not hopping to the word of some big-headed guy who doesn't even understand his position in the moral compass of this world." The three blinked at her, looking absolutely baffled. Merci?" Batroc hazarded. "Don't even mention it," Gwen told him, turning around to walk out of the door. "Wait, Pink's Flare! Where will you go now?" Terrible Eye asked after her. "I must warn you, we already know of your association with Bullseye. We will hunt you down again, using him as a telltale sign." "Yeah, well, your day is folly, sister," Gwen called over her shoulder. "I'm not in Bullseye's lot anymore. Consider this my resignation announcement." She needed to get her head straight after that pink flash incident. Everything felt wrong and unbalanced, as if some other creature had temporarily accessed her mind and spoken to her, through her own voice. This was what time travel felt like, didn't it? Either that or prophetic visions, which were really the same thing if you really thought about it. Either way, one thing Gwen was absolutely sure of: she couldn't stay with Bullseye any longer. This was her breaking point. She was only hanging out with him out of her own self-interest, and suddenly that put a target on her back and assassins were after her neck? Fuck no, she was so out. Her hands drifted to her pockets, where she kept Cecil's card. When nothing met her hand, her heart hitched for a second, before remembering she didn't take the card along to missions where they were liable to have her pockets checked. No need to let people think she had any sentimental attachment to it, even though she categorically did. It was back at Lester's apartment. No sweat. She'd break in to grab it after she had her affairs in order. Speaking of affairs, how the fuck was she going to play this? Where could she go? The documentation she needed had been Lester's major control over her. How was she going to combat that? Well, there was a reasonably high amount of money in her bag, high enough to get her a fake ID. But she didn't want any crappy ID that could be encountered by basic database searches. If she needed to pay up for it, she demanded the best. She needed the pink-haired prick studying in the Jean Grey School of Higher Learning. Quentin Quire was having a regular day. Take classes, do homework, eat meals, and train and train and train. There was a lot of training when you were the strongest psychic of your generation. So for some reason, Jean Grey was absolutely certain that he was going to implode any day with the force of all the sensory inputs he took in all the time. No matter how much you tried to tell her that his control was impeccable, she just didn't listen. He was just about ready to crash once the day was over. A new video game was lying on his desk, just begging for him to slip on his headphones and immerse himself into the tinny music and fast-paced gameplay. He didn't have any patience for anyone right now, especially not annoying people banging away at his door and demanding he make them a passport or driver's license or whatever the newest fad was. No, he told the blonde girl with the pink ombre the second he relented to her, insisted knocking and opened the door. No, listen, dude, it's important. The girl. Was she a new student? Quentin didn't remember seeing her around. He didn't care to find out either as he shut the door again mid-conversation. He should have turned back to his game console, ignored whatever shit show had struck the school this time. But instead, his mind kept wandering back to the girl. It was strange, he decided. She didn't give off any thoughts. Not that he was trying very hard to read her mind or anything. It's just a sense you develop as time goes on, scraping over surface thoughts and seeing what they were thinking. And this girl, she had no surface thoughts at all. Yet she was definitely organic, he could tell that much, but nothing past it. This time focusing hard, he telepathically zoomed in on her. Still nothing. It was only peering through the minds of people around her that she could be perceived. She was more of a conundrum than he had thought at first. Then he looked deeper into the mind of a passing student whose attention was snagged on her. Hey, the pink-haired girl was yelling at his chosen set of eyes. Do you want to know what Quentin Cry's actual first name is? No, she wouldn't. There was no possible way she'd know that. It had to be a bluff. Sure, the person replied, confusion echoing through the connection he had built between them. Great, and because I'm 55% sure he's piggybacking off your brain, I want you to know that this is out of pure spite, because he isn't getting your fake ID. Anyways, his real name is Quintavious. Not a bluff, red alert! He sprinted out of the room, telepathically grabbing the annoying little snitch before she let the secret loose. She's lying, he managed to tell the student, his chest heaving as the pink-haired girl wriggled uselessly in the air. The student took in the scene, looking skeptical. You know what? Sure, he decided. I'm not getting involved in this. Is she a new student? No, Quentin replied. He had no way to explain it, but nothing about her was mutant. The girl, however, looked mildly contemplative. I think I'm gonna make it work, she decided. Sounds like a very me thing. Okay, crazy girl thought being mutant was a fashion accessory, worrying and problematic behavior. He tried to stay calm as he lowered her to the ground and marched away. At least he didn't have to tell her to follow as she trotted alongside him, grinning all the way. I knew that would work, she sang-song victoriously. Quentin wanted to scramble her brains. He had the feeling it wouldn't work. How was she doing that, anyway? It wasn't like he was a stranger to the idea of erasing one's psychic presence, but if a psychic of that caliber had popped up, Quentin, as the only Omega-level telepath of his generation, should have heard of her. And she definitely wasn't subtle in any other part of her life, so what gives? Still, he decided to ask her outright. Are you a psychic? I can't read you, he blurts out. Communication sucked. It was better when you knew exactly what the other person was thinking. How did the normies last a day talking like this? Against all odds, the girl's mouth stretched into a grin. I have telepathic protection, she crowed. That's so second plot convenient. If I give you documentation, will you please leave me alone? Quentin begged. I mean, no promises, because the author might want to drag you into future projects, whether you like it or not, but I'll try my best. Signs of delusion were becoming more and more apparent with every passing moment. How wonderful. The sooner he got her out of his life, the better. So, what kind of identification do you want? He asked, telekinetically putting away piles of laundry and unfinished assignments without lifting a finger. Everything, the girl replied. Do whatever you want, brainwash whoever you have to, just make sure that there's an ironclad case for me being a person who has existed in this dimension before this. God damn, of course it had to be something like this. Dimensional hopping crazies interrupting his game night looking for proof of his existence. Couldn't have been something simple like a pilot's license. Trying to keep his very short fuse under control, he looked at her flatly. That's a lot of work, and I'm going to have to be really thorough. But you'll help me, she pointed out. Why? Because we've already spent too much time on this conversation to be a cutaway rejection gag, she replied, as if the answer was obvious. And then she was reaching into her penguin bag and slapped a veritable brick of green paper onto the table. Also, I'm willing to pay the price of it, she added. I'm going to help you, but not because of the nonsense you said at first, Quire conceded, tucking the wad of cash underneath his mattress as he stared her down. To her credit, she returned the gaze, not even concerned in the slightest. I'm going to have to know your name, he told her, and other details about your health, academic, and socioeconomic status to properly fill out all the paperwork. Oh, I'm Gwen, she introduced. Gwenpool, and I'm 19? 18? Oh, that's weird. It's nebulous in my head. As if they don't really know. Oh, I'll just put you in as 19, he decided. If she ever wanted to dabble in some underage drinking, at least she wouldn't have to torment other fake ID dealers over it. They got to work, building together a comprehensive backstory for Gwen in this dimension. It looked like building a D&D character, except boring. Finally, hours after the sun had disappeared into the horizon and his eye had begun itching fiercely from the tiredness, did he look up. This is going to take a while. Can you wait a week? Make it 3 days and I double it, she bargained. No amount of money will change my physical limitations. It's either a week or you get out. Fine, it was worth a shot. Gwen shook her head. I'll see you in exactly 7 days, Quintavious. Fuck, she really did know his name. And if you try to spill the beans to anyone else, I'm going to murder you in your sleep, he yelled at her, even as she tried to make a hasty escape through the window. I'll hold you to that, Gwen called back, disappearing from the pane. A couple seconds later, he saw her running through the campus grounds, being chased by security. The second she was out of this fucking school, the better, in his opinion. That weird muffled feeling that struck her thoughts had completely melted away. Gwen didn't entirely see the correlation, but the fact that it happened thrice was a bad sign. Foreshadowing for a future arc? Very optimistic of the writers, considering she had done pretty much nothing this entire time. Still, no one else seemed to be feeling it, not even Quentin Quire, was supposed to be a telepath, and hence, in tune with his feelings or something. Miles, she'd excuse not picking up on some weird mentor tricks. She loved the guy, but Jesus fucking Christ, he had to start listening to his fire sense more often. But Quire? Unthinkable. Still, she had 7 days to kill, and what should she do in that time? There was plenty of stuff, nothing in the area, but if she strain hopped back to New York, she could tackle a lot of things that she had been building up into her to-do list. MODOK had to be threatened into leaving her alone. If going for his cronies hadn't done the trick, and a new source of income had to be found. She needed to get Cecil back, move out of Lester's apartment, head off the Bullseye confrontation so that he wouldn't get the drop on her, and rebrand herself from the ground up. Speaking of, she knew exactly what she should do while Quire wrapped up the paperwork problems. Wait, you need to understand why this is a problem, right? Peter stressed, looking at his begrudging friend. Thankfully, Matt was here to back him up, or else he wouldn't have the courage for this intervention. Not really, Peter shrugged. I don't see how it's my place to put up a fuss. Usually, interventions were about self-care and breaking problematic behavior, not whatever this clusterfuck was. A spiral of gossip and interventions, apparently. Because the conversation had gone from Miles and Miss Marvel to Peter and the weird, possibly a criminal costume maker Matt was friends with, and led all the way back, in the most unexpected manner, to Wade Wilson, aka Deadpool. And Peter would love to say good things about Deadpool. He had strong morals, sometimes, and was friendly, also only sometimes. And he'd been in the Adventures, which was such a stupid decision. He still couldn't believe that Cap had okayed that, and... Okay, so Deadpool was just there. Neither good nor evil, but overwhelming heaps of both. Balancing it better than anyone else in the business. Except for now, because he was coming off really evil right now. Matt especially looked like he was about to throw Wade off a bridge. What do you mean it's not your place? He growled, pulling off no-nonsense rage much better than Peter ever could. I mean that Bullseye might be a bro, but that means that I don't get to criticize the way he runs things, Wade explained. And if I go running around throwing my lot in with Spider-Man over little things like this, it's finally going to force me into picking a side. And that's sad and conducive to business. And you're saying you couldn't give a fuck about all the victims? Peter demanded. Petey pie, I'm an assassin. No shit, I don't give a fuck about victims, Wade dismissed. Matt, in a moment of astute emotional torture, held out a printed picture of the girl in question. Peter was thrown for a moment, seeing her frozen in relaxed delight, even as the real one suffered through extreme torment. Gwenpool was a young woman, barely more than a girl. If he didn't know better, he could have easily thought she was a high school sophomore. In the image, she was sitting in her pastel pink, painfully Deadpool-inspired costume with the mask off, grinning at the costume so wide that her eyes were creased shut, even as clumps of blonde pink hair stuck to her cheeks in a tangle. Wade faltered upon seeing her photo once more, or their professional respect and live and let live attitude melting away bit by bit. She's very young for the lifestyle, he allowed, at first, but obviously has some potential, or Bullseye wouldn't keep her around. But she's a fan of mine, and I should be doing my due diligence as a role model, and... He was crumbling before their eyes. Peter took savage joy from that. Okay, fine, you win, Wade relented, finally. I'll give him a talk, and if that doesn't work, I'll beat the shit out of him. By all means, beat the shit out of him, even if it works. Chapter 8. And boom. New York City. A place for misfits and failed experiments to gather and soothe their egos by donning tights and masks and capes. A city that bred crime like it bred annoyingly bright superheroes to deal with said crimes. A thrilling sort of equilibrium, balanced by a hair's breadth. Except for today, where the balance had shifted towards crime, when a young millionaire's birthday party had been broken up by a gang of masked men packing serious heat. Instantly, the story was all over major news networks, started trending on Twitter within the hour. Condolences had already started being drafted for the parents, and emergency services hadn't even had the chance to respond yet. It was sheer pandemonium. "Tick-tock, little boy," the ringleader of this whole scheme sneered, waving his gun uncomfortably close to the face of the boy. And he would be damned if the horror of this wouldn't get him on the map. "Mommy and Daddy'd better hurry up." The little nepo bastard scrunched his face up and sobbed, grating on the ears, but his parents sure would love it. This would be a great incentive for them to chuck in a couple of $1,000 more. Now, regarding the rest of the children, he sniffed at the eyed the children shoved in the back, all gagged and tied up to make sure they didn't kick up a fuss. Each one was dressed in pretty clothes, all designer shit and silken handkerchiefs. One of them was even wearing a fucking suit. Who makes suits for 11-year-olds? These folks had better be in some big money. Old or new, it didn't matter to him. Just that he could line up and his boys' pockets with it. "Check 'em and see if there's anything we can sell on them," he directed his henchmen. "Rings and lockets and shiny little jewels, that sort of stuff." "And watches, boss?" "Yes, and fucking watches." Why did he have to clarify these things? It was so obvious what kind of things were valuable and what weren't. He wouldn't have these problems if he had sprung for the good mercs like Deadpool or Batroc. Wasn't Bullseye making quite the name for himself recently? He had this new apprentice or something, he wasn't sure. It didn't matter anyway. He couldn't afford their rates right now. After this ransom, however, it would be a very different story. All dreams of grandeur he had were cut off by a blur of pink and white and yellow that jumped out of the air vent and slammed a foot directly into his jaw, sending him sprawling. Everyone froze, trying to look at the interloper standing tall in front of them all. A petite white girl with stick-thin arms and a truly pathetic fighting stance stared him down, her foot ready for another kick. She wore what appeared to be an exact replica of Deadpool's costume, except pink where it was red and white where it was black, and yellow lightning bolts arcing their way up both sleeves, meeting in the middle to create the initials GP. "What the fuck?" someone whispered, looking at this strange apparition. "The name's Gwenpool," she announced, putting her hands on her hips, "and I'm sorry, but you're going to have to break this little party up." "And who's gonna make us?" one of his boys asked. Good thing it was him, too, because the ringleader's mouth was too sore for him to ask the obvious himself. Was this Deadpool's little sister, or some sort of hyper-obsessed fan? Either way, if she followed the pool method, then that meant she was in the merc business. Probably had been hired by the parents. Maybe he could sway her with the promise of money. Unless there were more mercs backing her up, they couldn't bribe them all. "I am," she replied simply. "Me and the power of this machine gun." Jesus fuck, where had she stored that huge thing all this time? Everyone scared as she began firing indiscriminately at the scene, the weight of the gun so drastic that even she had difficulty staying upright as she spun around. And yet, with all the shaking and the screaming, somehow none of the kids got caught in the crossfires. Bullet holes peppered the walls, and most of the gang was left fallen, given their fair share of fatal and non-fatal but still hurts like a bitch wounds. But no kid got hurt. The ringleader whimpered, curled up around the scorching metal wedged within his ribs, sending warm, thick liquid oozing from his body. Gwenpool stepped over the remnants of his boys to come to a stop in front of him. She crouched down, looking him right in the eye. "You aren't going to recover from this, ever," she whispered, loud enough for him to hear. Tears of pain and fear spilled out from his eyes and shook violently. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to. "Please, don't do this to him." "I could end it quick and painless." What did it matter in the end? Dead was dead, and he didn't want it. "But I'm not going to." Relief struck him. He wanted to cry tears of joy even as she continued. "You're gonna have to sit in your own blood, feeling your life drip, drip, drip away, and simply hope that someone cares about you enough to come save you. You know why?" She was waiting for a response, so he had to force his cracked lips to form the question. "Why?" Gwenpool pulled her mask off to give him the full force of her megawatt smile. "Because I'm a hero now." And then she was springing up and bouncing over to the kidnapped children. "Alrighty, kiddos, let's get you home." The kidnapping target wailed in outrage, as if he recognized the girl, but Gwenpool didn't give a shit, heaving him over her shoulder and dragging him out of the building, hurting all the other children along with her. Cursed at Gwenpool. "Take care, Richie," Gwen shrilled, ruffling the rescued victim's hair. "Hope we don't run into each other again." He glared at her, attempting to reach forward and bite her. She whipped her hand back before he could do any real damage. "I never want to see you again either," he screamed. "I thought I was going to meet Spider-Man, or someone cool. Why did my parents get you again?" "They didn't," Gwen told him plainly, a statement so bland that she shocked him into silence. "No one hired me," she explained. "I saw you needed help, so I came to help." He blinked, shaken. Go to your parents, give them a big hug, and appreciate what you have, she suggested, elbowing him through the giant crowd of reporters and cops and firemen, straight to where his parents were standing, sobbing hysterically. They rushed over excitedly, sweeping Richard into his arms. "Oh, my baby!" The mother cradled him close. "Thank you, miss, thank you so much," the father stammered, his hands an iron grip on the boy. Then he did a double take as he realized who he was talking to. "Wait, you're that merc. Gwen." "See ya," Gwen quickly bowed out. She would have backflipped away, but she had no gymnastics training or upper body strength whatsoever. Instead, she went with the good old grapple gun. Maybe she should have been more into DC, because she could kick ass with her grapple skills there. "Someone stop that fugitive!" a police officer screamed, and bullets whizzed past her ears. They didn't land a single hit, her instincts honed by all the time she spent dodging Bullseye's shots. She had better aim than all these people combined. It was almost sad. But if she could put up a good fight against these people, then her chances against Bullseye were looking a little better. She needed all the confidence she could get, because she was not looking forward to this confrontation. Bullseye's apartment remained as unchanged as normal. Gwen didn't know why she expected him to have burnt it down in rage, but it wasn't. When she snuck in through the window, there weren't any broken windows or missing plates, or even leftovers rotting away. It was all perfectly fine. Stable. She gulped and made her way to the storage room and her little nest, snatched up all her stuff and shoved it into a garbage bag she'd brought along with her. Every trinket and scrap of paper and Luke's blunted knife was thrown into it without a thought. She never wanted to come back and didn't want to leave behind anything she might regret. The playing card with Cecil's soul inside it was tucked under a stack of raggedy blankets that she had never washed. She had it stored in a plastic card carrier to protect it from any water damage or fungus or any other decay. Once she cracked it open, the card seemed to be in pristine condition, fresh out of the pack, and then stabbed into a person's eyeball. But it wasn't damaged further than that. It would work just fine for her purposes. Putting it safely in a pocket close to her chest, she began shoving more of her personal belongings into the trash bag. Any firearms she discovered, which were many, she put into her penguin bag. Once the entire place had been cleared out, all that was left were a pile of faded blankets and a single depressed mattress. She wasn't desperate enough to be taking those. Garbage bag stuffed full, and penguin arsenal weighing down her shoulders, she walked into the rest of the room. She'd wrapped up all her tasks in his house, and now, what was the bitchiest way to say goodbye? She settled on wandering over to the mini-fridge, digging through it, cool as a cucumber. There was never much in there, but this time she had hit the jackpot. Leftover pizza and a box full of takeaway noodles. Too much for one person, so he must have been ordering for her as well. It was kind of pathetic, but in a way that made Gwen grin sadistically. She started digging into the least spoiled stuff, leaving the door of the fridge open, like a dig. The framing was all worth it when the front door clicked open, swinging out to reveal the navy blue costume of Bullseye. Immediately the man zeroed in on her, sitting cross-legged beside the fridge and eating his pizza. "You've been gone for a while," he noted, his voice dangerously calm, like clear skies when there was a hurricane alert going on. "Wow, I didn't notice," she drawled, taking care to chew with her mouth open. She saw the way his mouth twitched in disgust. Good, she disgusted herself. But this was necessary, or she would be scared of him for the rest of her life. She had to burn away all the trauma, once and for all. "Don't play games with me," he snarled. "I'm not playing," she replied right back. "What are you gonna do, stab me?" It was Hubert speaking, of course, because he did pull out a handful of ninja stars to hurl at her. Gwen swore and ducked, feeling something nick into her skin and leave shallow gashes behind. "You just have to stay quiet and do your part," he screamed at her, all his ominous lurking discarded. "Why do you have to be fucking contrarian, you little pipsqueak?" "Maybe because I don't want to work with you, dipshit," she screamed right back, gun in hand. It was a battle against thrown weapons and firearms, and surprisingly, the firearms weren't an immediate win for her. "Couldn't we do this in a less dramatic way?" she asked, dodging a kick to the face and a dart to the ankle. "What, were you expecting a severance package?" "I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but it would have been a nice surprise," she replied, hanging upside down from his grip. "And you expect me to be nice after you've been nothing but the most deceptive little minion I could have asked for?" "Not really," she admitted. "But I guess you're right about one thing. I'm pretty deceptive." Even upside down, it wasn't any trouble whipping out the card she had hidden away and throwing it to the ground, resisting the urge to call out an anime catchphrase. "Cecil, you up for some vengeance?" And the card floated up, encased in blue vapor, until it got slightly above 5 feet off the ground, where the vapor solidified into the blue, translucent figure of Cecil. It was a wonder why Bullseye had frozen and simply watched as the transformation took place, but it was lucky he did, because it was just the right time for her to shoot the grapple gun directly at Bullseye, pinning his hands together. Cecil blinked, settling down to hover slightly above the ground. What? "I thought you said I was going to get revenge." "And you did," she assured him, "by being a distraction." This isn't over, Bullseye roared. She kicked him in the head in a move she'd picked up from Batroc during their brief time together. It was an instant knockout. I wanted to do that, Cecil lamented, waving his feet over Lester's head. It went right through. Sorry, man, she offered in small consolation. Wow, that wasn't the fight I thought it would be. It's kind of underwhelming. Maybe because he wasn't that scary in the first place, Cecil suggested. And it was just the way he treated you that made it feel like he's super scary. But that's not good for comic sales, Cecil, she whined. We gotta make it a cool last dance. Like what? He asked skeptically. Wade paced in front of Lester's apartment, unsure of how to explain this whole situation to the guy. You didn't mess with other people's hiring practices. This was the #1 rule of Merc business. That was how you lost customers. And if there was one thing the deadliest man in the world couldn't afford, it was not to have customers willing to pay for that service. It was his only skill. The fuck was he supposed to do without it? But he'd seen the kid on TV, in videos, and she was a riot. And she didn't deserve to have the pool spirit squeezed out by that maniac. An admittedly funny maniac, but you understood. Also, Matt was threatening a team divorce over this, and sure, he was always doing that, but this time it was serious. So he had to shut up and knock on that door. And knock he did. Once, twice, thrice, no answer. Lester, he called through the mail slot. Lester, I know you're in there. I've had cameras on your door for weeks now. But no one answered. He simply kicked the door open. It wasn't even locked, the fool. Except when he walked in, Lester wasn't standing inside. He was tied to a punching bag and dangling in the middle of the room, a nasty bump on his head, and a girl in front of him. He knew without double-checking that this girl was Gwenpool. Her costume was a little different, but it was still distinctive enough to not be confused by anyone else's. It didn't stop him from being shocked. What? Who? I was supposed to be saving you, goddammit! He kicked the door shut. So much for that dramatic hero entrance. What makes you think I can do it myself? She asked, tilting her head at him like she'd made a particularly smart-ass comment. I just decided to ditch this loser. As you should, he found himself nodding. You've got spunk, kid. I can respect that. And you're... She looked him up and down carefully. Buff, I guess. What's your shtick again? Like a dagger through his heart. He forced himself to laugh despite the pain. I think I like you, kid. Think of me as a mentor, if you will. To being a mercenary, sometimes hero who's in the know. In the know? Yeah, he gestured the words they were made up of. The fourth wall. Ah, gotcha, she winked, rushing past him. And I suppose if you're in the know, you wouldn't mind this? In the next second, he wasn't entirely sure how, but she had one of his katanas in her hands, twisting it around experimentally. What? Hey, give that back! Wade patted himself down, confirming that, yeah, she really took the katana strapped to his back, and this wasn't a replica trick or something. He'd fallen for that one before. Never again. Sorry, bud. You should know the importance of legacy items, she called, rushing out of the window on the other end of the corridor and swinging herself out. He sure hoped she had a stolen web slinger or something, otherwise he'd really hate for potential to go out like that. Slamming into concrete moments after exacting petty revenge was very on brand for a one-time Deadpool clone. He hoped she wasn't one of those. She had a lot of main character potential. A phone was ringing. His phone. It was Matt. Yes? Did you talk to him? Nah, she had him strung up in his own kitchen and was making a break for it by the time I got there. Oh, good for her. Yeah. Am I off the hook now? No, you still should have done something. There's no fucking winning with you hero types, is there? The lease to Cecil's uncle's apartment had run out, so they couldn't crash there. Just as well, because Gwen was 75% sure the rotting corpse was still in the closet, and she wasn't entirely sure how Cecil would feel about that. But they needed a place to stay, and thankfully, after much pleading, Ronnie had let them take the couch at hers for a few nights, just as long as they earned their keep. I'll take any job, she told her seriously. Well, any non-murder, non-criminal freelance violence job. Is there a market for that? Ronnie will find something, the woman sighed, typing away at her keyboard. Gwen sighed too, taking a seat at the counter, dressed in a brand new costume the woman had managed to make as a rush job. She had an identity, a new costume, her best friend was back, and her profession as both a hero and a merc was more solid than ever. She'd gotten everything she could ask for in a comic debut.
Yeah, you may want to look at the screen now.
Wait, what?
Okay, so I spent literal months on this, only to finish this in the middle of literal exam season. I hope you enjoyed because I really liked the effects and special ways I managed to bring out the pop-up boxes from the original fic to life. I wrote the original fic. I mentioned this. Bullseye cut, I wrote that. If you want to read it, the link is in the description. I'll also put timestamps of every time there was changing text on screen. I know that reading it is like no one's looking at the screen for podfic. So yeah, I'll put up a pinned comment for that. And I want to say that I'll be doing podfic soon, but I don't really see it happening since it's summer and my recording space easily goes into like 100 degrees. There's one fic that I really, really want to do. It's this X-Men Searchlight fic that I mentioned before. But otherwise, I really won't be doing anything unless you've got anything to recommend. And yeah, thanks for staying this long. It's 2 hours. Good job. And now I'm going to stop waffling around and end this finally.